Tonight, I want to share with you a secret guarded through centuries in the minds of Zen masters. A secret so simple that many people pass by it every day without noticing. Yet so powerful it can make you immune to anger, frustration, and anything that disturbs you. Think about the moments when your peace is stolen by something very small, an offhand remark, a forgotten message, a car cutting in front of you. In that moment, the entire tranquility you have struggled to preserve vanishes like thin smoke in the wind. We live in a world where everyone is in a hurry, where people are ready to react before they truly see what is going on inside. But inside you, there is a place that always remains unmoved, a space that no insult can reach, and no anger can grow. The Zen masters call this the still lake in the heart. In that place, everything is quiet, and you can see yourself clearly, like seeing the sky reflected in calm water. Tonight, you will learn how to return to that place. You will learn how not to be pushed away by anger, but simply stand still and watch it drift by like a slow cloud passing over the lake. You do not need years of meditation. You do not need to escape the world. You only need to see clearly the true nature of anger, and in the moment you stop nourishing it, its power vanishes. Anger cannot live when you look at it with the light of awareness. So breathe slowly, deeply, relax your shoulders, let the breath pass through your throat and fall down into your belly like a warm stream. Tonight, let me tell you the secret that can make your mind immune to every anger and annoyance, so that from there you can rediscover the immovable calm within yourself. As the sun slipped behind the bamboo line outside the village, the wind carried the scent of wood smoke and damp fields across the mossy stones of the ancient temple. The courtyard's bricks, dried after a hot day, and the small bell hanging under the eaves still held a faint resonance like a thin thread of sound. The student returned in haste, his eyes still showing the embers of a quarrel in the marketplace. He pushed the wooden gate, paused to take a deep breath, then stepped inside, his heart turbulent like water disturbed by a handful of pebbles. In the main hall, the teacher sat beside a basin of clear water placed on the stone floor. The lamp's flame cast a ribbon of golden light like silk across the surface. The teacher asked nothing. The student felt his throat dry, and the moment he tried to speak, the anger within him flared again. He recounted the insult, the sense of being looked down upon, the urge to respond forcefully to reclaim his dignity. Each sentence raised his heartbeat and made his breath hot in his chest. The teacher remained silent, gently touching the water's surface. A small wave rippled outward, carrying tiny undulations. The lamp's reflection cracked into separate fragments. The student saw his own face distorted in the water. The teacher flicked a drop of water off the rim of the basin. The drop fell onto the stone floor and shattered into many tiny beads before seeping into the mossy gaps. Within a few breaths, the water calmed. The reflected face grew whole again. The lamp's beam formed a soft line on his forehead. The teacher told him to look carefully and tell him whether the reflection becomes clearer when the water is stirred or when the water is still. The student did not need to speak aloud. His heart already knew the answer. He sat down, his knees touching the cool stone floor, his hands resting on his thighs, closed his eyes, and directed his attention toward the rising and falling of his belly. Inside him the warmth of anger remained, like a strong fish swimming in a small pond, whenever he placed his hand in. The water clouded. Outside the porch, a thin breeze passed, banana leaves brushing together softly like a whisper of clothing. In the backyard a cat stepped across the bricks, its claws gently tapping out a cadence. The student suddenly realized those sounds had always been there, only when the anger rose. His inner ear had been blocked. He decided to say nothing more to himself. He allowed the burning heat in his chest to have a place, like placing a hot bowl on a wooden table knowing that in time it will cool down. He felt his heartbeat echo in both sides of his chest, and in time that echo too would fade like a gathering crowd dispersing. The teacher stood up, carried the basin of water to the porch, placing it where the new moon's light just peeking through thin clouds, could shine. The surface caught the moonlight, forming a silvery coin. The student followed and sat a pace away. The teacher scooped a small ladleful of water and poured it slowly back into the basin. Each drop formed a circle. The circles met and then dissolved without needing any interference. The teacher said that in his heart he too had circles like that. Each thought is a circle. Each memory is a circle. Each remark in the marketplace is a circle. If he tried to block one circle, the others would pile up into a swirl. If he let them meet and dissolve, the water would find its way back to calm. The student remained silent. At his eye's corner was a moist feeling, not of water, but of understanding having just been touched. The night deepened. The insect's sound was like a thin carpet spread over every bush. From the old well behind the garden rose cool vapor, carrying the scent of moist earth sweetly. The student remained seated. The anger now was like a cloud halfway across the sky. He noticed the cloud cast a shadow on the ground, but the shadow was not the cloud, just as the insulting words of the afternoon echoed in his mind. The echo was not him. The deeper he looked, the more he saw there was a wide open space behind all reactions. That space was neither compressed nor dragged. Unmoved by any push, it was like the sky above the temple roof. Birds could fly through, clouds could drift in, rain could fall, but the sky would not tear. The teacher brought out a teapot and poured into 2 small cups. The steam rose, scented with fresh leaves and a hint of grapefruit blossom. The student lifted the cup with both hands, feeling its heat touching his palms and spreading to his wrists. He drank a small sip, tasting bitterness on his tongue that turned into a gentle sweetness. The teacher said anger is like the taste of tea. When it first touches, it is sharp and strong. But if you do not rush to spit it out, and let it flow through your throat with mindful attention, it will change flavor. The student focused on breathing in and out. Each exhale he imagined placing a pebble into the bottom of the basin. The first pebble he named cease. The second pebble he named observe. The third pebble he named act. Cease means not rushing into reaction. Observe means to notice where the heat is, which muscles are tense, what story is telling itself in your head. Act means to choose the smallest thing you can do so as not to stir the water further, like sipping a little water, washing your face, stepping out onto the porch, or simply remaining silent for 5 breaths. On the stone step, a square of moonlight fell onto the bricks. A moth flew into the flame, then fell. The student suddenly felt compassion for himself in those days when he would plunge into the fire of words and responses. He remembered the times after arguments when he was utterly exhausted, his head aching, sleep heavy as a stone. He saw clearly the cost paid for just a few moments of reaction. In retrospect, he realized anger always begins at a very small point, like the tip of a needle touching water. If he would just stay still at that moment, the water would only ripple slightly. But if he flailed his arms, threw more stones, stirred it with self-defense and mental narration, the little pond turned into a storm, and he was the one who made it. The teacher folded his hand towel and placed it beside the basin. He went into the garden and plucked a few weeds around the root of a flower bush. The student followed. The teacher said that some weeds can be pulled gently and come right out, others cling deeply, needing one to shake them slowly so as not to scatter the soil. In the heart there are habits that cling deep. If you jerk them, you tear even the roots of kindness. So everything must be looked at with the eyes of a gardener, not as punisher, not as abandoner, but as one who understands the soil. The soil needs just enough sun, just enough water, and patience. When they returned to the porch, the water in the basin reflected the starry night sky. The student leaned close and saw his eyes were calmer. He heard his heartbeat steady. Once again he recalled the marketplace scene, recalled the face of the person who spoke harshly. But the memory no longer had sharp edges. It was like a painting placed in a frame, hung on the wall, something one can look at to learn the lesson. But that no longer runs wild in one's head. He understood that being immune to anger is not never getting angry. Immunity means that when anger comes, he has a place to return to, a way to set the hot bowl down, a trust that if he is still enough, the water will settle on its own. The night was deep. Outside the gate, a few dog barks echoed. Then silence followed. On the roof, dew pooled in tiny drops, ready to tumble onto the leaves. The student asked his master's permission to scoop a ladle of water to wash his face. The water touched his skin, cool and crisp, taking with it the leftover heat on his brow. He dried himself with a coarse towel, feeling his facial muscles loosen, his shoulders drop, his feet set upon the tile floor as though placing a precious object. He bowed to his teacher, no longer in haste. Within him was a quiet promise. Tomorrow morning, back in the market, he would look upon those faces with different eyes. If someone spoke harshly, he would hear it as wind passing through bamboo rows. There is a rustling sound. But no stalk of bamboo is broken, for the stalk that knows how to bow will bend just enough. If something needed to be said, he would say it only after placing down the 3 pebbles in his heart. If it did not need saying, he would let it pass like a cloud gone thin. Before stepping inside, the teacher pointed toward the basin of water. Its surface remained as clear as a newly polished mirror. The teacher said, "Every night the wind comes, sometimes gentle, sometimes strong. But tomorrow morning, when the sun rises, no matter how the wind blows, the water can remain clear if no one disturbs it." The student nodded. He understood that what he had just learned was not a small trick, but a way of life, a life in which he takes responsibility for the lake within, not handing it over to others, not leaving it to the whims of chance winds. He turned and walked into the long corridor. The lamp's light cast his silhouette as a slender streak upon the tiled floor. With each footstep, he felt a growing silence within him, wide enough to welcome tomorrow with a heart no longer dragged along by anger. When the door closed, the night returned to its regular rhythm. Somewhere in the village a child had just fallen asleep. An elder had just extinguished their light. A couple had just ceased their argument. On the surface of the water in the basin on the temple porch, the stars lay still, as a message that the sky is always there. We only need the water to be still in order to see it. And the student knew that from tonight on, he had found a way to return to his own lake whenever the wind rose. That night stretched long and quiet. After the student returned to his room, the lamp still burned low on the table, casting light on the dark wooden wall. He sat by the window, gazing out into the rear garden of the temple. Moonlight draped in thin strips across the ground, rays weaving with bamboo shadows in a pattern of stillness. For the first time in many months, he did not hear the world's clashing voices within him, only his own breath. Exhaling and inhaling very slowly, he recognized that the words the teacher had spoken were not sermons, but a road opening up, a road that does not lead outward, but back within. He remembered the early days when he first came to the temple. Whenever someone said something displeasing, he would immediately react. The more he studied, the more he saw that within him dwelt 2 persons, one fiery, eager for victory or defeat, and the other quiet, simply observing. Before, the second always was weak, suppressed by the louder voice of the ego. But tonight, that quiet one stood up. He no longer wished to win arguments. He only wanted to understand why he was so quick to anger, why a single word could wound him. When he looked deeply, he saw that the root of anger did not lie in another, but within his own fear of being undervalued, in the belief that he was not enough. Anger is not the enemy, it is a signal. It tells us that within lies a wound not yet healed. The night wind filtered through the window crack, touching the lamp's flame, making it flicker and then straighten. He looked at that flame as though seeing his own image. The wind cannot extinguish the fire. It only makes it dance for a moment before settling again. If the flame is too weak, the wind will blow it out. But if the flame knows how to bow moderately, it still shines. So it is with anger. if we try to smother it by denial. It smolders. If we let it flare, it burns us. But if we observe it with understanding, it will bow and transform into wisdom. The student smiled softly, a small but genuine smile. He poured himself a cup of cold water and drank it in sips. The water touched his throat and spread like a stream. In that stillness he understood that the secret the teacher spoke of is not in fighting the emotion, but in living with it in awareness. When anger arises, simply know that you are angry, and observe that anger without judgment. When frustration comes, breathe and attend to where that feeling appears in the body. Each act of observing loosens the bond that binds the mind, and he becomes a little freer. The next morning, the early bell rang from the bell tower, echoing across the temple courtyard like thin fog. The student opened the door, stepped out, dew resting on his robe, the scent of moist earth pleasant. He went to the well, drew a ladle of water to wash his face. The cold water touched his skin, carrying a sense of wakefulness. The eastern sky turned pink. In that moment, he felt within himself a small sun rising, no longer a flame easy to flare, but a warm circle of light. He understood that in the days ahead there would still be harsh words, still things displeasing, but inside him there was now a silence sufficient to receive them. The water already knew how to settle, so even if the wind arose, it would only ripple the lake for a moment before calming again. The teacher passed by, saw him, and smiled. No words were spoken, only early birds perched high on bamboo called to each other. The first sunlight touched the old basin on the porch, its reflection shimmering like a greeting from the new day. The student bowed, understanding that last night's lesson would follow him all his life. For immunity to anger does not come by miracle, but by the practice of each breath, each gaze, each moment reminding oneself not to stir the water again. And as he stepped down the porch steps, he felt in each footfall a gentle peace that no words can describe. In the afternoon, he returned to the temple carrying a few bundles of vegetables, some rice, and a bit of dried tea. The monk was in the back garden, trimming the dead branches of a starfruit tree. The slanted sunlight spread evenly over the monk's hair like fine golden threads. He set the basket down and stood watching for a while, noticing how the monk's movements were slow yet precise. Every snip of the shears matched a breath. Every falling branch was like an excess thought being cut away. He suddenly understood why his anger had always grown back. It was not because life was full of storms, but because he had never learned to cut in the right place. He stepped closer and asked the monk to teach him how to look at a dead branch and know where to cut. The monk said, "Walk around the trunk first. Do not rush to decide. See where branches cross and make the canopy tangled, where they block the sunlight, or where they rub and cause wounds. Cut where it helps the tree breathe. Do not cut to take revenge on a small scratch. Cut so the tree feels lighter." He stood still. The lesson from last night was continuing this afternoon, only the props had changed. The mind is a tree, anger is a branch stretching across, knowledge is the shears, and breath is the rhythm of the hands. He held the shears carefully and listened to the sound of the dry branch snapping, gentle as a sigh. Night fell again. A thin layer of moisture drifted in from the distant sea breeze. Inside the main hall, the light shone like a low-hanging star. He sat before the same basin of water from the other night. This time, without the monk's reminder, he scooped a small ladle of water and poured it back, listening to the ripples spread out and fade into one another. He practiced naming each state of mind just enough to recognize it. This is irritation from hunger. This is fatigue from the sun. This is sensitivity from lack of sleep. This is an old wound touched again. This is pride from the habit of wanting to be right. None of these states were rejected, nor were they indulged. They all stepped aside when he exhaled into his belly. He learned to listen to the tiny contact between a thought and his body. When a thought whispered, "That person looks down on you," he observed whether his shoulders tightened, whether his jaw clenched, whether his back stiffened. Once the body became aware, The thought lost its footing. It no longer climbed high enough to scream. He understood that being immune does not mean building a wall. It means removing the hooks that anger could cling to. The next day, there was more work than usual at the temple. A group from a nearby village came to ask the monk for guidance on raising children peacefully. Since there had been many conflicts at home, the monk told him to prepare seats and a pot of tea. When everyone had settled, the monk told a story about a well. In the backyard, the monk said, "Every morning I draw water into a white porcelain basin and leave it there. I do not drink it right away. Freshly drawn water has small bubbles and sometimes a bit of sand from the bottom. If left still for a while, the bubbles vanish, and the sand settles. When the water is calm, its sweetness becomes clearer. In a household, if each person can let their mind settle for a while before replying, their words will be smoother, and their urge to argue will settle like the sand." People in the group nodded. Some smiled, some sighed, as if they had just set down a heavy burden. Sitting in the back, he looked at their faces and saw in each one a separate pond, some shallow and easily stirred, some deep and hard to muddy, but every pond could be still, as long as no one kept stirring it. A small child sat with his mother on the steps, staring at the basin of water like it was a toy. He sat beside the child and pointed out a faint reflection of the moon. Though the moon was not visible in daylight, the child asked why there was such light. He said, "Maybe because the sky is still there, even when our eyes cannot see it." The child laughed, dipped a hand into the water, and the reflection broke apart, then came together again. The child found delight in that, while he learned another lesson from the lake's way of healing itself. You do not have to force the pieces back together. You just have to stop moving. The light knows how to return on its own. On the third evening since that first night, a new test appeared. A stranger came to the temple, his voice sharp, demanding to see the monk at once, claiming it was urgent. His words carried edges. In the past, those edges would have cut him. But today, he watched to see how many there were, and where they came from. He invited the man to sit down, poured him a cup of tea, and said the monk was in the back garden and would be out soon. The man refused the tea, snapping that everyone was polite only when they had no solutions. For a moment, he felt a hot wave rise along his neck. That was the signal. He did not let that heat become a flame. He breathed. He focused on the warmth in his chest, acknowledging exactly where it burned. His gaze softened, like a stretched fabric relaxing. He nodded and said he understood the man's impatience, and if the matter was truly urgent, he could take him to see the monk right away. The man's harshness dropped a notch. When the monk came out, everything flowed smoothly, like water down a clean channel. Later, the monk told him, "Sometimes, people are not angry at you. They are angry at life. You just happen to be standing there, so you think their arrows are aimed at you. But if there are no hooks inside you, the arrows fall to the ground." Hearing that, he felt a light bloom in his chest, as if someone had just lit a lantern within. In the days that followed, he noticed that the angry clouds inside him appeared less and less often. When they came, he recognized them as visitors, not as ambushers. The visitor knocked on the door impatiently, but if he opened it in the right way, the visitor would enter and sit down. He gave the visitor a place to sit, not a bed, just a chair. The visitor stayed for a while and then left, leaving behind a few strands of gray hair on the back of the chair and a faint scent of smoke. His house remained undisturbed. Everything stayed in its place. He began to believe in his own ability to return. That belief made his steps steadier, his voice calmer, his eyes less in need of finding allies outside himself. When no longer seeking validation, anger found no place to drop its anchor. One humid noon, he walked across the field to gather banana leaves for wrapping cakes. The sky was so blue it seemed you could hear the blue soaking into the grass. The wind played across the rice paddies, turning them into rippling waves. He remembered the river of his childhood, where he had learned to swim. The person who taught him once said, "Do not thrash too much. Let the water be less tired, and you will be less tired." He realized that lesson was also today's lesson. Each burst of anger was a bout of thrashing, muddying the water. He stopped at the edge of the field, sat down, and let the sweat run for a while. He closed his eyes and listened to his heart. His heart said he had come a long way from the first day, but the road ahead was still long. His heart said that one day there would be a real storm, not just the passing clouds of these recent days. The storm would test whether the lake's surface would stay calm or not. He answered his heart that he had a method. He named the method to remember it clearly. Stop. Look. Do. Stop first. Look carefully. Do the smallest thing. He stood up, stretched, and placed his hand on his chest as if greeting an old friend. When the rainy season came, the test arrived as foretold. In the village, a small clash broke out between two families. Rumors spread as quickly as fire meeting wind. The market buzzed, and everyone he met asked whose side he was on. The choice seemed to squeeze him into a narrow path, barely wide enough for one person. He did not rush to choose. He remembered the shears and the dead branch, remembered the well and the basin of water, remembered the flame leaning and then standing upright again. He visited both houses and listened to each with the same ear. That ear was the ear of a gardener, not of a judge. He saw that each family's anger was clinging to a different hook. One was clinging to pride, the other to fear of losing face. He suggested they sit together quietly in the temple courtyard, not to speak everything out, but to see things clearly. At first they refused, saying hot matters had to be spoken out immediately. He nodded and said, "The bigger the fire, the more it needs less blowing." He invited them to drink some water, just to sit for a moment and ease the urgency. They agreed because no one wanted to seem less patient than the other. They sat. The first 5 minutes were heavy as stone. The next 5 were lighter, like water soaking into earth. When they spoke, their voices softened, and the story dropped some of its thorns. By the end, no one was entirely right, no one entirely wrong, but a path had opened between 2 rows of trees. That was enough for them to stand up without feeling defeated. As they left the temple, the rain began to fall, first scattered, then heavy. The sound of rain on the roof tiles merged with the sound inside his chest, round as a bell. As time passed, the student noticed a new habit forming. Each evening, before the lamps were lit, he went out to the veranda, set down a basin of water, and sat until he could see the sky held within it. On windy days, the sky in the basin was only a patch of gray. He did not force the sky to be blue. He simply waited. Sometimes a bird landed on the rim to drink, leaving a few drops splashed onto the tiles. He did not grieve those drops, knowing the basin would fill again. His peace was the same, sometimes splashed by small accidents, but he knew it would return if he did not scold himself. From that small habit, he did other tasks with a different state of mind, cooking a meal with the heart of the person sitting by the basin, sweeping the courtyard with the heart of the person trimming dead branches, speaking with the heart of the person pouring tea without haste, keeping silent with the heart of the person watching clouds drift. Then one night, he dreamed he was standing before a vast lake at the foot of a mountain. Winter had just begun, and white mist lay low over the water. On the far shore, there was a small fire, and above it an old teapot. He heard the water boiling, heard the faint crack of a dry branch in the fire. From the mist, a person appeared. The face was unclear, but the steps were like the monks. The person said nothing, placing a small mirror into his hands. He looked into the mirror and did not see his own face but a lotus in bloom. He was astonished. The person, still silent, reached out and touched the lake. The mist parted into a narrow path leading straight to the other shore. He followed that path, each step a soft strike on an invisible bell inside his chest. When he reached the far shore, the tea was just right. The person poured him a cup, Its aroma was unlike any tea he had ever known. It smelled of dawn, of night insects, of whispered words, of apologies never spoken, and of late embraces. He drank and woke up. On the table beside his bed, a patch of moonlight fell through the window, just like the fire in his dream. He understood the dream did not bring an omen, it brought firewood. Firewood to light an inner flame for cold days. Once, he returned to the old house where his childhood had been full of arguments. His mother was older now, hair completely gray, her hands trembling as she poured water. The meal carried the scent of lean years, of braised fish and boiled vegetables. Of times he had walked away from the table mid-meal. Today he stayed longer. His mother still had the habit of saying things that touched his pride. But he listened as if hearing the wind slip through a door crack. He saw that she did not hate him, she was simply tired. She brought up old stories like someone planting a cane on a steep hill. Sometimes the cane slipping into a crevice. He picked a piece of fish for her, placed the rice bowl closer to her hand, and spoke of the temple garden and the starfruit trees the monk had just pruned. On the wall, the wooden clock ticked slowly. He realized he had traveled far, not just with his feet but with the path of his reactions. Returning home without bringing thorns in his chest was a miracle only he could know. That night he slept in his old bed, listening to the rain hitting the metal roof, and did not remember a single argument. In the morning, he fixed a door whose hinge had been stuck for years, oiled the lock, swept the porch. His mother watched, her hands still trembling slightly, but her eyes soft, like the sediment at the bottom of a settled basin. On the day he left home to return to the temple, the village road was wet after the night's rain. Puddles reflected the sky like scattered porcelain basins. As he walked past them, he found himself learning a new lesson. The sky could reflect anywhere there was water. But not every place had water still enough to hold the image. The mind was the same. The sky of wisdom rejects no place, but its reflection appears only where there is stillness. He understood that immunity to anger is not a certificate. It is a living practice. Each day is an exercise. Each person is a mirror to see the surface of one's own lake. When he returned to the temple, the monk was sitting on the steps, holding a small broom, sweeping away dried petals. He sat beside him, telling the monk about his home, his dream by the lake, his noon in the fields. The monk listened as one listens to rain, not interrupting, letting the story find its own way. Finally, the monk said he had understood correctly. Then he pointed to the sky, where a long cloud had just been torn by the wind into thin strands. The monk said, "Some ange are born to alarm. Some ange are born to illuminate. Some ange are born to call us home. When you know their true names, you stop fearing. When you do not fear, you stop fighting yourself." He watched the cloud until it dissolved into the sky. A feeling of gratitude rose in his chest, light yet deep, like an underground spring touching stone. From then on, at the start of each day, he chose one small task to do with full presence. Some days it was washing a single bowl, and he washed it as if washing away lingering murkiness. Some days it was folding a blanket, and he folded it as if folding away unsaid words. Some days it was cooking a pot of porridge, and he stirred it as if stirring layers of sediment in his heart so they could blend together. Doing small tasks the right way became a bridge over difficult stretches of river. Thanks to that, when someone accidentally touched an old wound, he no longer sprang up like a coil. He felt his own depth and knew his direction of flow. Being touched was no longer being harmed. It was an opportunity to see the map of his inner streams once again. Time patiently reshapes the grain of a person. Just as wind, passing through many seasons, teaches bamboo leaves how to bend, the student was the same. His posture lost its sharp edges, his voice its haste. Those who met him after a long while could not quite name the change. They only sensed in him something like the scent of tea that had been brewed just long enough. One night, when everyone had gone to sleep, He stayed up alone beside the basin of water. On the surface were reflections, his own, the roof above, and the late stars. He suddenly thought of those before him, who had passed down the same secret his teacher had given him. He thought of the arguments that would go on in marketplaces big and small, in crowded dining rooms everywhere. He thought of children growing up between the voices of adults and the sound of their own. And he understood that his task did not end with keeping peace only within himself. His task was to lift the basin so that anyone who needed to could look into it. He would not force anyone to look, nor stop anyone from stirring the water. He would simply place it there, on the veranda, under a lamp bright enough to see. Near midnight, the wind shifted direction. From the alley came the hesitant footsteps of a stranger. He stood up and went to open the gate. A young man stood there, eyes red from crying, hands clutching a crumpled piece of paper. In a hoarse voice, the young man said he had quarreled with his father, said things he should not have said, and had walked all evening to the temple because he had heard that temples could calm people's anger. He invited the young man onto the veranda, poured him water, and did not ask anything right away. The young man cried again, his tears forming circles on the wooden table. When the sobbing eased, he told him the story of the basin, short and simple, and asked him to try sitting quietly for 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes were as long as a winding mountain road. The young man was not used to looking inward, so each minute felt like a steep curve. But he made it through. When he opened his eyes, he said the heat in his chest had faded. The student smiled and handed him a towel. He told the young man that immunity does not mean not being touched. It means knowing you have skin and flesh, and knowing how to wash clean when dust sticks to you. The young man nodded, gripping the edge of the towel as if it were a rope lowered into a well. That night, he stayed at the temple. The student laid out a mat for him on the veranda. The insects sang a lullaby for one who was young and one who once had been. The lake of night was calm again, as if it had never been stirred. The next morning, when the young man left, the student stood at the gate watching him go. Along the road out of the village, puddles still held pieces of sky. The young man avoided some puddles, stepped into others. His shoes grew wet, then dried again in the wind. Life was perhaps the same. Avoid what you can. Wipe off what you cannot. Immunity is not a spell. It is a skill. A skill forged in the moments when no one claps. No one gives reward, yet it is the skill that saves a person when no one else is there. He turned back inside. The basin was still there. He looked down, and the sky fell whole into his eyes, peaceful as an unspoken vow. He knew that from then on, each day he would continue along the path already begun, not seeking perfection, only return, not chasing silence, only pausing so that silence could find him. And in that stillness, even if anger came, it would arrive like a courteous guest, entering gently and leaving when the tea had cooled. In the days that followed, the season changed slowly, like an old man exchanging his coat. Mornings grew clearer, roosters crowed farther, and village roads dried quickly after light rains. The student woke earlier than usual, stepping onto the veranda while dew still clung to the leaves. He made a new habit of placing a cup of water beside the basin, not to drink, but to remind himself that everything needs a moment of waiting. During that waiting, he swept the courtyard, picked up the fallen leaves before they turned fully brown, and listened to the broom touch the brick floor in an even rhythm. Like breathing, some mornings, he sat under the starfruit tree, watching the first sunlight slide along the wooden wall, seeing dust particles rise for a moment before vanishing into the light. He understood more deeply that anger is like those dust particles. When the light of awareness shines upon it, it appears clearly, only to dissolve in the right way. No need to chase it. No need to brush hard. Just open the window and let the light in. The village began its small festival. People raised bamboo poles in front of the communal yard and hung long ribbons for children to run around. The student was asked to take care of a corner where the elderly could rest. He arranged a few bamboo chairs, placed a jug of cool water, and brewed a pot of tea. People came and went, laughter mixing with calls and chatter. Occasionally, a sharp word rose above the joy, freezing the air for a moment. He noticed that language could be like the wind. The right breeze cooled the festival. Too much wind raised goosebumps. Someone came complaining that their son refused to help and played all day. Someone else grumbled about a neighbor blocking the path. He listened to each story as one listens to a countryside song with many harmonies. Each voice had its rhythm. And if he lifted one too high, the melody would lose balance. He only nodded, offered them a cup of water, and waited until the story flowed into its softer part before adding a word. It was like guiding water into a channel, not by pushing with your hand, but by opening a low path for the water to find its own way. By the end of the festival, the harsh words had thinned out. The tense faces had softened, leaving only the scent of new rice flakes and the smoke from the stoves of food vendors. One late afternoon, the man who had once made him angry years ago walked into the temple, carrying a woven palm basket with a torn corner. He stood at the gate for quite a while, as if unsure whether he should come in. The student went out to greet him and saw something different in the man's eyes. The man said he had come to ask for help fixing the basket because its old cords kept coming loose. And more than once the bottom had opened just as he arrived at the market. It was a small story, but his voice carried a cautious trust. The student invited him to sit down, took a thin rope, and patiently threaded it through each weave of the basket, pausing now and then to test the tension, like testing whether one's heart was still too tight or already soft enough. While working, they spoke very little, hearing only the birds calling to one another in the bamboo and the frogs croaking in the puddles behind the garden. When he finished, he handed the basket back and said that the joint was firm now. But when carrying heavy loads, the man should add a lining at the bottom so the weight would not press on one single point. The man nodded, stood up, hesitated, then took out a small bag from the basket filled with pomelos from his garden. He placed it on the veranda and said it was a gift. The student did not refuse, only thanked him with a bow. As the man left, his shadow stretched long across the tiles, like the newly tied rope that had not only extended the life of the basket but perhaps also reconnected a distance between two people. There were nights when he did not sleep right away. He would sit at the wooden desk in his small room, spread out a blank sheet of paper, hold his ink pen, and write down what he had learned that day, like a traveler through the forest drawing a map so as not to lose his way tomorrow. He wrote that anger is like a waterfall, frightening to look at but quick to pass. The problem is simply not to build your house too close to the edge. He wrote that irritation often begins from lack of rest, lack of water, or lack of space for breath, and when those three are replenished, irritation withdraws on its own. He wrote that words can turn into swords when sharpened by pride, but can also become cloths when moistened with understanding. Each line was like another pebble dropping to the bottom of a basin, making the surface steadier. When he finished writing, he folded the paper and placed it under the teapot. He never kept those pages long. After a few days, he burned them in a corner of the garden, watching the smoke rise, carrying away what had been understood, leaving room for what had not yet been. One morning, a young couple came to the temple seeking the monk's help. They had been arguing about everything, from grocery money to childcare. The monk invited them into the main hall, but asked the student to sit with them on the veranda for a few minutes first. The student poured water, placed 3 pebbles on the table as he often did, and told them each to pick one and name the strongest emotion they were feeling. The husband said anger. The wife said hurt. The student nodded and said to leave the 3rd pebble in the middle and call it seeing. They sat in silence for a minute long as a bridge connecting 2 shores once divided by a boat of arguments. Then he told them the story of the basin, short, like a single tap of sound. The husband exhaled deeply. The wife looked down at her hands. By the time the monk came out, the air had already softened by half. By the end of the visit, they had not solved every disagreement, but they no longer wanted to win. They wanted to understand, and when understanding takes root, the voice naturally lowers, like water coming when the wind dies. Sometimes challenges did not come from others but from his own body. The long cold season made his knees ache each morning. The pain made him irritable inside, made every task feel heavier, and even the short walk from his room to the courtyard seemed longer. He noticed this without blaming his body or the weather. He changed his routine, warming up slowly, rubbing oil on the sore spots before stepping out. When the pain spoke, he whispered to it, "I hear you, I am here." That sentence softened the thorn within. He discovered another secret of immunity to anger: learning to be gentle with one's own discomfort. When he was gentle with his body, he was gentle with others. The path of gentleness was like a canal dug through dry fields, once water flowed. Every plant was nourished. One rainy afternoon, as the rain lashed against the roof tiles, the student sat by the window watching the water gather into streams. The rain turned the courtyard into a vast mirror, reflecting the gray sky and swaying bamboo. He suddenly remembered how, in the past, he had tried to swallow his anger, thinking that was the right thing, but in truth, he had built a secret reservoir. That reservoir filled up over time, and just one small spark would make it overflow. Now, instead of swallowing, he invited anger to sit in a chair, offered it a cup of water, and asked what it was trying to protect. He realized that anger always came with a letter, one that said he was afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being overlooked, afraid of losing control. When he read the letter, he understood the sender, and when he understood the sender, he no longer wanted to chase away the messenger. The rain fell all afternoon, but by evening the courtyard was dry. Water had gone where it should. The earth had drunk its fill, and returned the rest to the air. The heart was the same, knowing what to absorb, what to release, never holding so much that it floods. The following month, the monk sent him on a journey across the mountain pass to visit a small temple where the old abbot was frail and short of help. The road over the pass had many curves. In the early morning, clouds wrapped around the mountainsides. By noon, they cleared, revealing white limestone ridges like the back of a great fish. He walked most of the way, carrying a small bag with clothes, some dried food, and an old aluminum teapot. Along the road, he met a group of porters carrying heavy loads. Their ropes were loose, and the baskets clanked together with dry sounds. One of them grew angry because his load kept slipping. The student stopped, asked to help, and tightened the strap using the same method he had learned when mending the palm basket. He explained that the rope should cross underneath in an X shape so the weight would spread evenly. The man exhaled, his tone softening. They offered him a sip of water. A bit of irritation fell to the road like a small stone no longer worth carrying. When he reached the temple, he began working right away, sweeping the courtyard, scraping moss from the steps, changing the water in the old monk's basin. The old monk smiled and said, "This water is for reflecting the sky." The student replied, "I have brought the sky with me from the temple across the pass, but I still need the basin to remember." The nights at the small mountain temple were deep and quiet, with few traces of human sound. Lying in his wooden room, he listened to the wind beating against the mountain side and to the thin threads of insect songs stretching through the darkness. In that silence, he remembered all the people who had passed through his life, the faces that had once angered him, the words that had once startled him. Strangely, those memories no longer had sharp edges. They had turned into a collection of smooth pebbles polished by the river of time. He picked them up one by one in his imagination, placed them in his palm, and thanked them for helping smooth the surface of his lake. He understood then that immunity does not come from avoidance, but from meeting things in the right dose and the right way. Just as a blacksmith tempers steel by dipping the blade into water only enough so it will not crack. The next morning, he went with the old monk to the temple's back garden. A bed of mustard greens had been eaten by worms. The old monk did not rush to spray chemicals. He simply picked off the worst leaves by hand and placed a few branches nearby to ward off butterflies. He said, "Everything has its share. If we try to kill all the worms, the greens will not grow well, for they'll miss life's small lessons." The student pondered the words and saw their truth about anger too. If one vows never to be angry, the heart becomes brittle and fearful of every gust of wind. But if one lets anger rule, the field is ruined. The real work is knowing when to pluck a leaf, when to shade a row, and when to let the sun and rain teach the plant. He helped the old monk build up the garden edges again, his hands touching the moist earth like touching an old promise between human and nature. When the sun climbed high, they went to the veranda for tea, the scent of wood smoke blending with that of freshly picked greens, making the morning simple yet full. When he returned to his own temple, he brought with him a few seeds and many stories. He told the monk and others about the mountain pass, the group of porters, the old monk, and the vegetable bed. Those stories were like bottles of water set on a table for whoever was thirsty to drink. Someone asked what secret had helped him change. He said there was no secret, only practice, to stop, to observe, to do the smallest thing. Someone else wanted to hear something miraculous. He pointed to the basin. The miracle, he said, lies in the capacity to settle, a capacity we all have. Though we forget, when we settle, we see the bottom. When we see the bottom, we know where there is mud, where there is sand, and where a clear spring flows. From then on, the feet naturally know where to step. One day at the market, a bigger fight than usual broke out. Two men were quarreling over a good selling spot. Their words escalated into shoving. The crowd gathered, voices shouting, objects clattering, children crying. He was nearby and felt a familiar wave of heat rising. But he stayed still. He neither jumped in nor turned away. He looked at the whole scene as one would view a painting with many colors, the red of anger, the green of fear, the gray of the crowd's curiosity. He stepped between the two men just as they paused for breath. He did not say anything grand, only suggested that they could draw a line down the middle and each step back a little, taking turns for fairness over the next 2 days. Some scoffed, others murmured in support, but when he drew the white line across the brick floor with chalk, it appeared like a reminder that boundaries are drawn not to drive people apart but to give both sides something to respect. The two men stared at the line for a while, then sighed. They agreed, because exhaustion had won over victory. The crowd dispersed like a receding wave. An old woman approached slowly and said softly that years ago, his teacher had drawn a similar line to stop an argument. He suddenly felt himself connected to a long current, not an impulse of today, but a continuation. When the northern winds came, nights grew cold and long. He lit a small charcoal stove on the veranda, set a kettle on top, and listened to the water hiss and sing. The sky was dense with stars, like thick embroidery, each one a needle pointing somewhere inside the human heart. He wondered what it truly meant to be immune to anger in a world full of injustice. He feared that his peace might turn into indifference. He took that fear inside and asked what it was trying to protect. It said it wanted to protect compassion. It did not want stillness to become a wall. He realized then the need to distinguish between peace and apathy. Peace is the ground for right action. Apathy is the excuse for doing nothing. From that moment, he reminded himself that in the face of wrong, one must not stay silent forever, only silent until the right moment. Then speak in the right place. Speak when the body is soft, the voice holds enough water, and the eyes hold enough light. Act when the hands no longer tremble and the feet know how to stand. In that way, peace and justice can live under the same roof. Time flowed on, and the student no longer called himself a man prone to anger. He simply called himself a learner. Each day was a lesson, each person a teacher. One day the teacher was an old woman whose slow speech kept the line waiting. He learned patience. Another day, the teacher was a crying child, hungry and tired. He learned to see the root of noise. Some days, the teacher was himself. When fatigue tempted him to snap at someone who arrived late, he learned to apologize immediately. Each time, the lake within him grew a little clearer, and the stars drew a little closer. He understood deeply that immunity was not a suit of armor but a healthy skin. Armor is stiff and heavy. Skin breathes and heals after scratches. Skin that breathes allows you to touch life without staying dirty for long. Then one day, sitting by the basin as usual, he saw the sky held so perfectly that he could no longer tell whether he was looking into the basin or up above. The moment was as thin as a dragonfly's wing resting on his shoulder before taking flight. But it was enough for him to realize that the secret his teacher had spoken of long ago had become part of his own breath, not to boast, not to hide, but to use whenever needed. And when needed, it would be there. He stood up, carried the basin inside, and heard the water ripple once, then fall still. Somewhere far away, a wind was probably forming. Right here, the lake already knew how to be calm, and he knew that as long as he breathed, he would always have a path to return. He stayed at the temple for many more years. The monk grew frail, his beard white as snow, his steps slow, but his eyes still bright and light, as though everything in life had been seen through a gentle mist. On long afternoons, when the temple bell rang, the student would sit with the monk on the back veranda, sharing a pot of old tea. The monk spoke less than before. Between them, words were no longer bridges, but stones that let the stream of silence flow through. He realized that some things can only be understood when we stop trying to understand, just as a lake reflects clearly only when it stops trying to reflect. Each time the monk poured tea, the sound of water meeting the cup was like a teaching. The student no longer needed to ask questions. The answers were always there, in the way the monk held the pot, in the rhythm of his breathing, in his gaze that looked at no one and yet made anyone feel seen through. When the monk passed away, it was late winter. That morning, the fog was so thick the second step of the veranda could not be seen. He sat by the bed, holding the monk's hand, feeling it light as a dry leaf drifting from its branch. There were no long last words, only one short sentence: "Let the lake remain still." That sentence stayed in his heart like a stone at the bottom of a well, motionless yet resonant. On the day they carried the monk away, incense smoke rose and the sky opened a clear space. He stood among the crowd, his heart neither heavy with sorrow nor light as a cloud, but steady and calm. He understood that this loss could not truly be called loss. It was only the shifting of water, from a small basin into a wide lake, where he could still see his teacher's reflection in every drop of dew on the morning grass. From that day on, the villagers began calling him teacher. He did not refuse, though deep down he knew he was still just a student, still learning. He took in young disciples at the temple, some with fiery tempers, some burdened by past mistakes, some simply looking for shelter from life's storms. He did not teach through many scriptures, only through stories. He told them about the basin of water, the dry branch, the man with the torn basket, the child stirring the water, and the rain that fell and then dried. Each story was a new pebble dropping to the bottom of the listener's lake. He could see in their eyes that anger did not disappear immediately, but it began to quiet, like a storm losing its wind after meeting a mountain. He never forced anyone to meditate or chant. He only taught them how to listen to the smallest sound within themselves, knowing that once a person can hear that sound, they no longer wish to shout. There was one young student, an orphan with a restless temper who often lashed out at others. One day, he dropped a water jar in the kitchen and was scolded by another novice. In anger, he threw his bowl of rice to the ground and stormed off to the garden. The teacher did not scold him. He simply followed and found the boy sitting with his knees drawn to his chest. tears streaking his face. The teacher sat beside him in silence for a long while, then picked up a dry leaf and let it fall. The leaf did not drop straight down. It swirled 3 times before touching the ground. He asked, "Did you see how the leaf fell?" The boy nodded. "When the wind blows, the leaf cannot choose its path," the teacher said, "but it still knows how to fall. Anger is the same. It need not be ashamed, only needs to know how to touch the ground." The boy looked up, his face still wet but his eyes brighter. The teacher left him there and walked away. That evening, the boy quietly returned to the kitchen, swept up the broken pieces, and placed them in a basket. He did not say sorry, but his actions were an apology that needed no words. The teacher smiled, understanding that the lesson had been written in silence, without chalk or blackboard. Sometimes, he went to the marketplace, not to buy anything, but to listen to people's voices. He saw the market as a classroom for the mind. Sellers, buyers, the angry, the cheerful, all were streams flowing across the same plane. He learned how to walk among them without being swept away. He helped lift crying children, picked up dropped parcels, returned the coins someone had given by mistake. Each small act was another pebble placed into the great lake of the world. No one knew his name, nor who his teacher had been, but many felt lighter when they met him. They could not explain why. They just found that beside him, their voices softened, their breathing steadied, and their urge to argue faded. He carried no doctrine, only stillness. That year, a small fire broke out in the village. It started in a thatched house at the end of the lane, where a young couple made their living weaving baskets. By the time people noticed, the flames were already licking the roof. The crowd rushed in, shouting in panic. The husband, desperate to save his goods, ran inside and was burned on the arm. The wife cried and scolded and trembled all at once. When the teacher arrived, the fire was out but smoke still hung thick in the air. He helped apply medicine to the man's burn, then sat beside him. The man cursed at the fire, at fate, at the sky, for destroying what he had built. The teacher said nothing. He simply took a handful of ash, mixed it with water, and gently applied it to the burn. "This ash," he said softly, "was fire a moment ago. Now it's medicine." The man fell silent. The cool ash soothed the wound that hot fire had caused. The teacher added, "In life, what harms us yesterday can sometimes heal us today, if we know how to use it. Fire and anger are the same. Neither is guilty, only misplaced." The man bowed his head, and the smoke in his eyes began to clear. After that, the teacher thought often about human limits. He realized no one can remain gentle forever if pushed too far, and no one stays fierce forever if truly listened to. So he taught his students not to become people without anger, but people who recognize when anger arises. Once, a young novice asked him, "If someone hits me, should I endure it?" He replied, "No. If you must, raise your hand to block, but do not let that hand become a weapon." A body's action is not wrong. It's wrong only when hatred leads it. The boy did not understand then, but many years later he said that the teacher's words had been like a fine needle, stitching a wound that he did not realize had healed until long after. The teacher knew he did not need to teach much, only to plant the right seeds. A seed may lie buried for years, but when the rain comes, it knows how to sprout. One spring, a group from the city came to the temple with cameras and notebooks, saying they were making a program about the secret of happiness. They asked if he could share a few words. He invited them to sit on the veranda, poured tea, and asked, "Have any of you been angry lately?" They laughed and said anger was normal. He told them to write down their most recent moment of anger in a few lines. When they finished, he gathered the papers into a stack, took a ladle of water, and poured it over the top. The water soaked through, the ink spread, and the words disappeared. "These stories do not need to be erased," he said. "They only need to spread. When they spread, The borders blur, and meaning softens. Happiness is not the absence of anger, it's giving anger a way to dissolve. The group fell silent. One asked, "What is your secret to being so at peace?" He pointed to the basin outside the veranda. The water's surface reflected the blue sky, nothing added, nothing taken away. "The secret is there," he said, "in what is so clear that everyone overlooks it." Over the years, the temple's roof darkened with age, but the hearts of its people grew brighter. New generations came and went, each carrying a fragment of the story. Some moved away to build lives elsewhere. Some stayed to tend the garden. When they returned, they brought with them life's collisions and asked their old teacher how to face them. He gave no direct advice, only told them about a long-ago morning when he once lost his temper at the market, and how he learned to look into the water's surface. That story was like a bridge between the two shores of time. Every listener found a part of themselves in it. For everyone, somewhere in their life, had once been that student. One rainy night, he lay listening to the sound of water falling on the eaves, thinking of the path he had walked. From a man quick to anger, he had passed through countless waves of his own heart. Each wave had taught him not to fight, but to understand. He understood that a person does not need to conquer anger, only to walk with it until it fades. Like one traveling through a foggy forest, you cannot chase away all the mist. You only need to know the way so you do not get lost. He saw himself as a small boat drifting on a long river. Its waters sometimes muddy, sometimes clear, yet always moving toward the sea. That sea had no great waves, only the vast, steady breath of earth and sky. He no longer saw a boundary between peace and life itself. Amid the wind, he heard a simple truth. When we understand our anger, we also understand the pain of others, and once we understand another's pain, anger naturally dissolves. The next morning, the sky cleared after the rain. Sunlight spread across the leaves, and mist rose like thin smoke. He placed the basin outside on the veranda, not to reflect, but to receive light. The surface sparkled, tiny specks of brightness dancing like playful spirits. In them, he saw the reflection of his teacher, of those who had once angered him, and of the students who had once been angry at life. All of them were held within the same lake, inseparable. He smiled. Peace, he realized, is not a reward. It is the result of a willingness to learn, to listen, and to love. From that day on, the villagers said that each morning, when passing the temple, they would see a man sitting beside a basin of water, gently stirring it with a twig, listening to the quiet of the human heart, reminding them that any anger can settle if we are gentle enough to wait. That summer, a neighboring village became embroiled in a long land dispute. Two families owned adjoining rice fields. Their boundaries blurred by years of rain and sun, and old land records had grown unclear. The elders argued bitterly whenever they met. The young exchanged cold glances. One afternoon, both sides came to the temple, believing it was the only place fair enough to open a path forward. He did not act as a judge. Instead, he spread a long mat in the courtyard and placed 2 stones at each end, marking the start and the end of a line. He invited both families to recount the origins of the conflict, but forbade any personal attacks. Every sentence that touched on pride or insult had to be rephrased as a description of events, not of people. At first, their voices were harsh, their fingers pointed, their eyes red with heat. Gradually, clarity replaced shouting. When every fact had been laid out, he took a bamboo stick and drew a long line between the 2 stones. "This line," he said, "is not a verdict, it's a pause, for the wind to rest." He asked them to wait 7 days, not to touch the boundary or reopen the argument. 7 days later, they returned, voices softer, hearts lighter. They recognized what was theirs to keep, what could be shared, and what part of the embankment they should rebuild together to prevent further erosion. No one won, but both left the courtyard with lighter shoulders. From that event, he formed a simple principle for resolving conflicts in the village. First, separate the facts from the emotions. Second, replace sharp words with descriptive ones. Finally, create a pause before deciding. The principle was posted in the communal hall, plain words, easy for anyone to understand. Whenever tempers began to rise in the market, people reminded each other of those 3 steps, and many arguments ended before they began. He never claimed to have invented anything new. These were lessons gathered and strung together into a rope, something to pull a person out when their foot sank into the mud. Once, a group of traveling merchants came through the village and set up a stall selling bright toys. The children were delighted, but the adults were uneasy about the noise and aggressive selling. In just one night, the market filled with overlapping voices, loud music, and people buying in excitement rather than need. An old woman selling vegetables in the corner sighed, saying that the noise had swallowed her simple greeting to customers. The teacher did not side with anyone. Instead, he called a quick market meeting at dawn. Everyone agreed to a simple rule. Mornings were for essentials, no loudspeakers. Afternoons were for fun. The toy stall could perform but must keep the walkway clear and turn off the music during funeral processions. The market steward drew a half-moon line in front of the toy stall with chalk. Anyone crossing it would be reminded. That afternoon, children's laughter still rang out, and the old woman sold all her vegetables before sunset. The village did not reject the new. It simply learned to give it a fitting place. Another day, the village carpenters were renovating the communal hall, sawing wood that sent fine dust into the air. Some people came to the temple to complain that the dust was settling on their porches, in their meals, and on their children's faces. The workers, however, argued that the project was urgent and dust unavoidable. He went to the site and watched their work. He did not ask them to stop. He simply suggested changing the schedule. Do the heavy chiseling at day's end when the wind blows toward the river. He said, do the sanding at noon when the market is empty. He borrowed a few old tarps to hang as covers and used water to rinse the path after each batch. Both sides were satisfied, not because the solution was perfect, but because both had been acknowledged. He understood then that anger often arises when a reasonable need has gone unseen. Once that need is recognized, anger quietly steps aside. Then came a more difficult storm. A child in the village made a serious mistake at school. Other children avoided him. His family felt ashamed. The teachers exhausted. His mother brought him to the temple, her eyes a mix of guilt and fury. Her hands clenched white. The boy kept his head down, his shoes caked with mud. The teacher asked no questions, requested no explanations. Instead, he placed a small wooden box on the table containing 10 pebbles. He told the boy, each day, take 1 pebble home and exchange it for 1 act of kindness that no one asks you to do. Just 1. Fetch water for your class. Offer your seat to someone. Pick up trash around the yard. Mend a broken chair. When it's done, bring the pebble back and drop it into the box here. 10 days later, the boy returned with an empty box. His eyes no longer avoided others. The incident at school was not erased, but a new rhythm had begun. The teachers noticed, the family relaxed, and friends began to include him again. The anger in the community lessened because now there was a visible way to make things right, a path for repair that everyone could see. When harvest season came, the fields shimmered with gold. The wind blew across the ripe rice, turning the landscape into waves. The teacher joined the villagers in the fields. At midday, a hired harvester machine got stuck in the mud. The machine's owner grew frustrated, and the field's owner grew anxious. People gathered, trying to push, but the machine was as heavy as stone. He stepped back for a moment to observe the terrain, then suggested laying bamboo poles as a sliding track and spreading sand for grip. The young men exchanged doubtful looks but tried it. 5 pushed, 3 steadied the wheels, 2 spread sand. The machine began to move. Minutes later, it rolled free. The owner, drenched in sweat, laughed aloud. The farmer offered sticky rice, and everyone sat together on the embankment, talking about the next season's crop. Amid that scene, the teacher noted something small but clear. When frustration first rises, if one focuses on the structure of the problem, on where the force goes, where the exit lies, anger turns into energy for action. Anger is like raw pulling power without direction. Give it direction, and it becomes useful labor. Back at the temple, he built a small corner called the Room of Reflection. It was not a place for ritual repentance, but a quiet room where anyone could sit for a while when their heart felt heavy. On the table were blank sheets of paper, ink pens, a few small wooden hammers, and several nails. On the wall hung an old wooden board. Whoever said something too harsh or acted too rashly could write their words on paper and pin it to the board for one day. The next day, they had to take it down, fold it, and place it into a chest by the pillar. No one was allowed to keep more than 3 notes at a time. The purpose was simple: to face what one had done, and to learn how to put it down on time. That habit spread beyond the temple. Families with frequent quarrels hung small wooden boards in their kitchens. Instead of endless arguments, they wrote their harsh words down, pinned them up, and took them down the following evening. The sharp edges of speech softened, not because anyone preached to them, but because they all practiced the rhythm of placing and releasing. One afternoon at the end of the year, a district official visited the temple and invited him to speak at a community reconciliation event. He was not used to public stages, but he understood that if one wished to sow seeds more widely, one had to step beyond the gate. That day he brought no polished speech. He simply told 3 short stories: the land dispute, the toy stall, and the stuck harvester. From them, he drew 3 short sentences: calm anger by defining the problem, calm speech by changing the frame of words, calm the community by creating a visible way to make amends. The hall fell silent, not out of fascination, but because everyone had lived some version of those stories. At the end, a young teacher shook his hand and said her class would have a wooden board like the one in the temple. A veteran said his carpentry workshop needed a rule about pausing before making decisions. He smiled, walking home through the cold wind, knowing that thin threads had just been tied from many places. Years passed. The temple roof had been re-tiled. The old starfruit tree blossomed less, but the village children still ran around the yard like fresh wind. Some who had once been known for short tempers now became mediators when their friends argued. Some who used to grab the best share now learned to give the tastier piece to a younger child. He never claimed any credit, knowing the real turning point was that families had learned how to reset their rhythm of living. Many households chose one night each week and called it the quiet evening. On that night, there were no screens, no speakers, no old arguments. They cooked something simple, ate together, and took a walk around the temple. On those quiet nights, the village paths were filled with the chirping of crickets and the scent of fallen blossoms. People remembered that happiness needs no display, only fewer collisions. One day, a group of young people told him they wanted to start a free weekend repair club. They asked to use the temple's veranda as a workshop. Broken chairs, noisy fans, cracked pots, and loose bicycle chains all found their way there. Those who knew how to fix things guided others. Those who didn't learned. In the laughter and clinking of tools, many old stories were untangled. He watched and thought, so immunity to anger is not just an inner matter. It becomes a network of caring actions that tend to the cracks of life. When objects are repaired, people are repaired too. When hands are busy doing something useful, mouths grow lighter. One spring, he received a letter from the man with the palm basket. It was brief. The man wrote that his son had stopped living recklessly and had returned home to help. The basket no longer broke at the bottom, because they now knew how to line it. He added that in the past, when harsh words struck his ears, he saw them as stones thrown into water. But now, when he hears such words, he sees them as arrows landing in dry earth. An arrow stays upright for a while, then loosens and falls on its own if no one pulls it out. He thanked the teacher, saying that the chalk line drawn at the market years ago had taught him the boundaries of his own heart. The letter was folded in thirds, the handwriting uneven, but it was warm, like a charcoal brazier that endures through many winters. One evening, he sat on the veranda as the moon rose over the hill. The student who once struggled with anger had become a guide for many difficult conversations. Looking back, he sought neither praise nor fault. He only saw a long chain of small choices. Each day, he could either throw a word into the air like a stone into a pond, or let it rest in his chest and replace it with a clear description. Each day, he could either place someone opposite him as an opponent, or place himself as a gardener. Each day, he could either press on a wound until it bled again, or wash away the dust and bandage it. Small choices create the great road. That road is not ornate, not mysterious, but strong enough for those who come after to walk upon without slipping. Late at night, mist began to fall. From afar came the bark of a dog. Then silence. He stood up and closed the gate. On the old brick ground, a few dry leaves lay scattered, like symbols of a language that needed no sound. Tomorrow, someone might come again seeking help over a dispute about land or houses. A group of young people might ask to organize a new activity. Someone might once again speak carelessly and hurt another. He did not predict, nor did he expect. He simply prepared three things: a space bright enough for everyone to see their own faces, a rule clear enough for everyone to find their way, and a heart steady enough not to be swept away by loud voices. That was all. With those three things, any anger, no matter which door it entered, would lose its strength. It would still arrive, but it would no longer have the power to shape the day of an entire village. It would have a way to pass through, and behind it, people would still be able to see one another. And when the temple bell rang to mark the last watch of the night, he told himself that if someone asked tomorrow for the secret to not being carried away by irritation, he would share just three practices. Name what is happening, instead of labeling the person. Give every decision a pause, even as long as it takes to pour a slow cup of water. Create in your home a place where mistakes can appear, and then leave. These three things would not make anyone a saint, but they would be enough to save a community from being dragged through days of meaningless collisions. Enough for a child to grow up knowing that anger is not destiny. It is only a signal waiting to be read correctly. And enough for an old person, looking back, to smile knowing they had not wasted their years on small tempests. The following year, heavy rains struck the upper valley for many days. Water poured down from the streams. The small river swelled, and the earthen embankment by the eastern fields began to erode. Rumors spread that the small dam in the hills might burst, and fear swept through the village. Some rushed to move their newly harvested rice. Others lifted their belongings higher. Groups quarreled over sandbags, voices shouting over one another. He walked along the bank, studying the erosion, marking 3 weak points with chalk on the wet ground. He gave no speeches, only asked the local safety team to spread out, keeping one arm's length between them so each could see the next. Avoiding a crush of people in one place, he told the youth team to line up bamboo poles, cover them with tarps, and guide the water toward the canal. The elders distributed sandbags according to field size, preventing competition. By noon, the rain was still heavy, but the drainage was clear. The rumor of the broken dam proved false. By evening, the embankment held, and the fields were calm again. As relief spread, he wrote another note in the temple's journal: in an emergency, the first task is not to argue who is right, it is to trace where the force must flow. When the water has a path, hearts collide less. After the storm, cracks appeared along the village road. The carpenters and masons, now free after harvest, joined him and the youth group for a communal repair day. There were no slogans, Only a simple board in the market listing the areas that needed fixing. Everyone who walked by saw their names assigned to a task. He preferred the slow and steady way, section by section, tapping each brick, filling every crack with fine mortar. The children gathered to watch, given small brooms to sweep up bits of stone. When they finished, each child received a small cardboard card stamped with the temple seal. By nightfall, the road was clean and the village bright. People told one another that repairing a village is just like repairing a person. If you mend the cracks in time, you never have to rebuild the foundation. Some time later, a conflict flared online. A short video of an old scuffle at the market was posted without context, and comments poured in like a sudden downpour. The person filmed became a target of criticism. Hurt and humiliated, they thought of leaving the village. He quickly organized a public meeting at the communal hall, inviting even those who had shared the video. The courtyard was so full that many stood outside the gate. He did not scold anyone. He played the entire video, showing what came before and after. Let those involved explain the sequence, and invited the person who posted it to speak about their reason for doing so. At the end, he reminded everyone of two principles for the age of information. First, verify the source before sending it further. Second, if you have accidentally spread a story that harms someone, take the initiative to post a correction with full context. He turned the meeting not into a trial, but into a lesson in responsibility. When it ended, the person criticized stayed behind to meet the person who had uploaded the clip. They shook hands. The heat of the story faded, not because silence fell, but because enough facts had given fairness a place to stand. At the local school, one final year class often erupted in tension, students seeing each other as rivals. The teacher came to the temple, saying she wanted an unusual lesson. Together, they designed a day called switching roles. Each student chose a classmate they liked the least and spent a day following that person's routine, their schedule, their chores, their interests. That afternoon, groups shared their observations. Laughter broke out over small discoveries. How the math whiz feared poetry. How the writer couldn't fix a bike tire. But then came long silences when one heard about another's pressures, the expectations of family, the fear of being compared. From that day, the class still competed, but attacked less. Grades still mattered, but no longer served as weapons. In his temple journal, he wrote, "When we understand another person's daily rhythm, it becomes hard to feel baseless resentment." At the market, he and the management committee built a small hut called the Quiet Room amid the noise. It was nothing more than a thatched shelter with 2 benches and a kettle of water. A simple rule hung on the wall: anyone angry with someone else must sit here together for 20 minutes. A third person, the mediator, could repeat what one side said to the other, but without comments or judgment. After 20 minutes, if the conflict remained, they could meet again later. Many pairs came to that hut. Not all left smiling, but most left with their shoulders relaxed. Over time, the hut became part of the village's social infrastructure, like a well or a milestone. People came there to cool down, as naturally as they went to the well when thirsty. During one lean season, rice prices rose and some traders began hoarding, causing unrest. He proposed a small community fund, contributed by households, to buy essential goods, rice, salt, cooking oil, and sell them at near cost for a few weeks. A public board at the hall displayed the quantities bought and sold and the date when the fund would close. It was a small measure, but timely, easing much of the tension caused by fear of shortage. Meanwhile, he met with the merchants to plan staggered restocking and shared schedules, preventing goods from piling up at one stall. They realized that many problems thought to be caused by bad intent were actually born from unclear systems. When simple data was made visible, suspicion fell away. One day, the village blacksmith came seeking advice. He had 2 apprentices, both skilled but constantly quarreling about the proper way to temper a blade. The workshop grew heavy with heat every time they disagreed. He did not know smithing, but he knew how to read a process. He asked them to forge 2 sets of knives, recording each step, the heating time, the cooling time, and then to test their strength by cutting through a bundle of bamboo. The results showed that both methods had merit. One produced blades faster, good for market knives. The other made stronger blades, good for farm tools. From then on, they divided the work accordingly, and the arguments faded. In the fields of thought, method is the dike that keeps floods of rivalry from drowning the crop. Over the years, these practices seeped into the soil like groundwater. In many homes, families hung small calendars in their living rooms. Beneath each day was a box for words that stopped in time. At month's end, they chose 3 that mattered most, folded them, and placed them in a small box. At year's end, they opened it and read, realizing they were no longer the people of impulsive reactions they once were. At school, the wooden board where students once pinned their struggles became a place for gratitude as well. One wrote, "I thank my friend for holding back when I was clumsy." Another wrote, "I thank my teacher for giving me time." Gratitude, he thought, is the fertilizer added after cutting away dry branches. Later, a new highway was built along the edge of the village. Convenience arrived, but so did noise and dust. Some complained, others rejoiced at the easier trade. The balance tilted. He did not oppose the road, nor did he ignore it. He proposed planting a line of trees along the roadside, species resistant to exhaust, with shallow roots and thick leaves to filter dust. He enlisted the youth group to collect saplings from the district nursery. Months later, the green barrier stood firm, like a long sleeve drawing calm back into the air. That evening, he stood beneath the canopy, watching traffic pass while the village's pulse remained unbroken. He thought, so, immunity is not about removing oneself from life. It is about adding a layer of protection between collision and the community's heart. Once in a rare while, he himself was caught in a conflict. An old friend came back from afar, bringing a plan to open a big cafe right next to the temple. The villagers worried that it would disturb their peace, while he felt sympathy for his friend's wish to make a living. Several heated meetings followed, words clashing back and forth. He realized he was standing between 2 forces. No matter which side he chose, someone would get hurt, so he asked to step back from the role of mediator, letting 2 others coordinate, while he only presented the options. He wrote out 2 scenarios, one allowing the cafe to open but with limits on hours and volume, the other moving it to the edge of the village in exchange for a discount on land rent. His friend was angry at first, saying he was not being supportive. He stayed silent and showed the data, the number of vehicles passing by, the safety distance from the nearby school. In the end, the friend chose to move to the village's edge. The cafe still drew crowds, and the village kept its rhythm. They remained friends. Sometimes keeping both sides whole is not about being clever with words, but about stepping away from the balance scale before your eyes grow clouded. Toward the end of the year, he and a group of young people gathered all the ongoing practices in the village into a short memorandum. It was not meant to lock the future in place, but to remind newcomers of the path already taken. There were 3 parts. The soft infrastructure included the quiet tent at the market, the reflection room, and wooden boards in homes and classrooms. The process part had 3 steps for handling conflicts and 2 principles for sharing information. The community part included shared workdays, a rotating fund, and a repair club. Each part had its own person in charge and its way of being regularly updated. He reminded everyone that everything must remain open to change when circumstances shift, that rules should never become new barriers. The memorandum was hung at the communal house and a printed copy was sent to every home. There were no drums, no slogans, only a quiet agreement that they would keep trying. One afternoon, he received a letter from a former student. The boy who used to be hot-tempered was now a teacher in another town. The young man wrote about how he had applied the reflection room in his class. He drew a chalk line on the playground to divide turns fairly and put up a blue tarpaulin as a place for students to meet when they could not get along. He wrote that he missed the old basin of water on the temple porch. But since there was no temple where he lived, he used a ceramic pot in the middle of the classroom. A few petals from the flame tree often floated on the surface. He told his students that whenever they felt like raising their voices, they should first look into that water to see if their own reflection was still clear. Reading the letter, the teacher felt as if a thin thread stretched across districts and classrooms. The secret, it turned out, did not belong to anyone. It simply found its way to those who used it wisely. That night was calm. With a light mist, he sat on the temple steps, watching fireflies glimmer in the garden. Each light disappeared and reappeared somewhere else, just like the small practices that spark and fade quietly in daily life, unshowy yet enduring. People often asked him for the secret to letting go of anger. He never spoke of patience as a distant virtue, nor of tricks to ease the mind. Instead, he told stories of the village after the rain, of the market after rumors, of the classroom after a roll swap, of the forge after a knife test, of the road after the trees had blocked the dust. The listeners nodded, then went home carrying something they could try the very next day. It did not require a leap, just one small step. No big vows were needed, only small, steady changes. The next morning, he rose early and walked around familiar corners. The quiet tent was still clean. The reflection room had 3 sheets of notes pinned up, and on someone's wooden board hung a handwritten thank you. At the village edge, the newly planted trees had begun to change leaves, their shade still thin but already cool. He understood that this work would never be finished. Everything needs care, polishing, reinforcement, replacement when broken. Yet he felt no discouragement, knowing that many hands and eyes were helping to maintain it. Immunity to anger was no longer a matter of one person meditating in isolation, but of a whole community creating systems to cool down and make amends. When those systems work well, anger cannot fill anyone's everyday life. It comes only to remind, then leaves to make room for what is useful. On his way back to the temple, he saw a group of children playing soccer. The ball rolled toward the edge of the road, almost falling into the ditch. But one boy jumped and caught it in time. The kids cheered, then quickly rearranged the teams without much arguing. The chalk lines dividing the field had faded after last week's rain, and one child picked up a tile shard to draw them again. He watched for a while, then moved on. In his mind, a sentence closed the afternoon. When people know how to draw their own chalk lines, anger can no longer steer them astray. And the strongest chalk lines are not the darkest ones, but the ones everyone agrees to keep. Autumn came. The village school held its annual parent meeting. The air was tight, because this year the school replaced the old grading system with a new performance-based evaluation. Some parents worried their children would lose out. Others hoped it would ease the pressure. The principal invited him to share his experience in easing worries. He did not give a long speech. He simply placed a board in the middle of the hall and drew 2 columns. One was, things to keep because they work. The other, things to try because they might work better. Each parent wrote one idea and placed it under the fitting column. Layer by layer, the notes formed 2 clear stacks of voices. As everyone looked up, the noise subsided. They could see the bigger picture. The keep column had routines like evening self-study hours, classroom discipline, and consistent communication. The try column included proposals like cross-class study groups, 1 homework-free day per month, and a handbook of conflict handling skills. The school picked 3 items from each column to implement. The meeting ended not with applause, but with a list of tasks, each with someone responsible and a review date. As they stepped outside, many parents told one another that anxiety grows large when it is still vague, but once it is written down, the heart calms. At the end of the year, the district held a special market fair where villages sold their local products. Sellers flocked in, competing for good spots and bargaining for booth rents. Just before opening, two groups began shouting, accusing the organizers of bias. The tension rose, threatening to ruin the fair. He proposed a simple distribution method. First, line up by registration order. Then draw lots 3 times, to decide inner or outer rows, and which ones faced the entrance. Each group sent a representative, and the drawing box was transparent so everyone could see. No one was completely satisfied, but it was clear and free from suspicion. The fair opened on time. Walkways were wide, and the calls of vendors blended into cheerful sounds. The organizers recorded the process and promised that next time they would simply open the notebook and repeat it. From that, he drew a new rule for the communal handbook. When resources are scarce, fairness does not lie in promises but in mechanisms that can be seen. One day, the village discussed how to care for children in the afternoons. As many factory workers worked night shifts, some households were short-handed, and kids played dangerously near the irrigation ditch. He and a group of young villagers proposed creating a shared activity space at the community hall. A rule board was hung by the door. Parents signed their names and time when dropping off and picking up their children. Toys were handmade from scrap wood, and the reading corner was stocked by the local library. Twice a week, a village elder came to teach a simple skill: how to fasten a seat belt, how to clean a scrape, patch a bicycle tire, or sort recyclables. Children who learn with their hands remember longer and feel more confident. When confident, they need not raise their voices to assert themselves. Parents felt at ease, no longer rushing from evening shifts. The whole village realized that prevention is the way to cool tempers at their roots, when troubles are few. Anger has little reason to grow. There was once a family of carpenters, 2 brothers who quarreled over a big order. The older brother wanted to keep the quality. The younger wanted to boost the numbers. Both had their reasons, but the dispute drained their energy and trust. He invited them to the workshop and set up 2 boards beside the workbench. The first listed measurable quality standards, smooth surfaces, joint durability, allowable margin of error. The second listed the production capacity limits, number of skilled workers, machine hours, wood drying time. When the criteria and the limits stood side by side, the problem revealed itself. They decided to separate the workflow. Rush but simple orders went to the new team, while special orders were handled by the experienced crew. Every month, they reviewed the numbers. If capacity was exceeded, they would recruit and train more people. Since then, there had been fewer shouts and steadier machine sounds. During one tea break, the older brother told him that when data are clear, people let go of their pride more easily. One late winter day, a group from another region came to survey the village for community-based tourism. They asked what was special about this place. Some people mentioned the festivals, others talked about the food, and a few told stories of the old temple. He answered that the most remarkable thing was how the village handled conflict. Visitors may come and go, taking photos before they leave, but a good system stays. If there was one thing worth sharing with others, it was how people drew their chalk lines when disputing a space, how they created quiet rooms amid the noise, and how they pinned and unpinned written notes at home. The survey group fell silent for a while, then said few places turned civility itself into their main feature. He did not wish to turn the village's ways into a commodity, but he agreed to write a short guide for other communities to learn from. That guide had no logos and no author's name, only clear steps with specific examples, so anyone could start at their own scale. When the new year came, the young people proposed a day without harsh words. On that day, the market hung a cloth banner announcing the time frame. The school organized a role-swapping game, and families posted reminders on their kitchen doors. Whoever spoke harshly would pause and rephrase it as a description of what they truly wanted. In the evening, Everyone gathered to record how many times they managed to stop themselves and how many times they did not. No one was punished. There were only numbers to show progress. The next day life went back to normal, but many were surprised to realize that most conflicts began with words thrown out before the mind had understood what the heart really needed. The lesson spread faster through one shared day of practice than through months of advice. At another time, a business proposed setting up a crop purchasing station on the village's edge. Their prices were good, but their weighing process lacked transparency, likely to spark resentment. He and the farmers insisted on an open-scale board and a camera projecting the weight onto a large screen. The company hesitated, afraid their methods would be exposed. The village replied that transparency was a condition for entering the village, not a privilege. In the end, the company agreed. From then on, complaints of unfairness dropped sharply. The only tired hands left were those that worked hard, and everyone could see it was fair. Through that, villagers grew more convinced that clarity is the best medicine to cool the fever of long-lasting quarrels. Another wave came from social media. An anonymous account spread a false story about a teacher. Students buzzed with gossip, and parents grew anxious. He and the school did not rush to strike back. They formed a verification group made up of 3 parents, 3 students, and 2 teachers. This group was granted access to all facts and asked to publish a short report within 3 days. The report provided a timeline and witnesses, confirming that the story was fabricated. It also proposed 5 recommendations, immediately added to the school's communication policy. The false account was not mentioned. To prevent further spread, only the truth was announced. 3 days turned out to be just enough time for tempers to cool and trust to grow. Afterward, one parent told him that when people have a clear way to verify information, they scold less and share more responsibly. The following summer, the district organized a training session for grassroots mediators. He was invited to lead a practice workshop. He skipped theory and divided the participants into groups. Each group recreated a familiar conflict, a fight over a parking spot, noise during rest hours, or family disagreements about caring for aging parents. Each group had to outline a 2-part process. The first part was the response, what to do immediately to prevent damage. The second was the building part, what structures to put in place to prevent similar problems in the future. When they presented, most realized that the response part was easy because everyone could see the fire, while the building part required patience and collective will. At the end, he summed it up with one sentence written on the board: long-term calm does not come from nice words or good intentions, but from the quiet systems that keep working, like public boards, transparent schedules, and clear rules. One windy afternoon, he walked past the village cemetery. The grass had turned green again after several rains, and moss covered the old tombstones. He stopped at his teacher's grave and placed his hand on the cool stone. Without saying anything, memories came back: his first steps, the small basin of water by the temple porch, and the short instruction his teacher gave before passing away. From a hot-tempered man, he had learned to build firm frameworks for his actions. From a quarrelsome village, they had built simple but effective bridges of conduct. Stability, he realized, does not fall from the sky. It grows from the decisions people repeat every day. As he walked back from the cemetery, he thought of the next generation. There would come a time when these conventions would become outdated and would need to be replaced. What truly mattered was not preserving the old rules, but keeping the habit of sitting together to change them when needed. In the last months of the year, he and the young group compiled a small booklet called the Easy Actions Journal. Each page described a situation and a simple habit to match it. When children argued, they played a role-swapping game for 5 minutes. When quarrels broke out in the market, people stepped into the quiet tent for 20 minutes. When harsh words were spoken at home, a note was pinned up and taken down the next day. When news was uncertain, it was sent to the verification group. When a scale seemed inaccurate, the screen showing the number was turned on. Every action was simple. Anyone could do it, and none required a large budget. The booklet was distributed for free, and after that, they held small workshops teaching people how to start. Neighboring communes requested the digital copy to adapt for their own needs. He felt glad that this way of doing things did not travel alone. It knew how to give birth wherever it was welcomed. As the Lunar New Year approached, the market grew crowded, voices mingled. Sometimes arguments flared up and then faded when someone reminded others of the village's agreements. Young men directed the motorbikes at the gate, children ran around the stalls of candied fruit, and the old woman selling vegetables smiled more than she had last year. He walked past the quiet tent and saw a young couple sitting close together, their hands gently touching. Before them was a sheet of paper with a few lines asking each other to soften their words. They stood up, folded the note, and promised to read it again that evening. He quietly tidied the chairs and added warm water to the kettle. No one looked at him as a savior. They simply saw him as part of the quiet structure that kept the new year from becoming too exhausting. On New Year's Eve, he sat under the porch, listening to the distant sounds of fireworks from the town. In the sky, bright bursts appeared and faded. On the ground, the small deeds done throughout the year lit up in his mind like a long string of lights. He did not think about grand resolutions for the coming year. Instead, he opened his notebook and marked what needed adjusting. The quiet tent needed one more light for the winter months. The wooden board at home should include a line encouraging words of gratitude. The reflection room needed a closed box for those too shy to express what troubled them directly. The rotating fund should have a text message feature to announce sales so that early visitors would know what was still available. The Easy Actions Journal needed a version for vocational schools. Each of those things was small, yet they were links in the chain that kept anger from finding space to swell. On the morning of the first day of the new year, he opened the temple gate to welcome a few people coming to light incense. A young man joined his palms and said that last year he had entered the quiet tent after a quarrel with a fellow vendor. And now the two shared a stall together. A teacher came with her child and proudly said her class had almost eliminated standing punishments, replacing them with a quiet corner at the back. A farmer told him the purchasing station had been running smoothly since the weighing screen went up. Those simple stories told him that the meaning of his work did not lie in philosophy but in the fact that each person had found a small, doable way to change. When enough of those small doable acts stand side by side, the face of the community changes color. By mid-year, the district invited him to advise on community rules for a new resettlement area. People there had come from many places. With different habits, conflicts could arise easily. He suggested starting with 3 foundation tools. A quiet tent placed in the community center instead of a closed meeting room, so everyone could see it and feel unafraid to step in. A public board displaying high-risk matters like trash schedules, quiet hours, and parking spaces, along with a quick feedback system. A verification group made up of representatives from different lanes, so that when rumors spread, there was a channel to respond. He said that people do not need to wait for every rule to live together. Just a few foundations so that voices do not pile up into walls. After a while, the new neighborhood started running smoothly. He received a few text messages of thanks. He replied that all credit belonged to those willing to stand at the entry of each issue, drawing and maintaining paths for others. Late one afternoon, he returned to the temple, walking across the old brick yard. The courtyard was empty, leaves trembling lightly. The basin of water on the porch was still clear, but he no longer needed to look into it as before. What it once taught had already flowed into how the village worked, into how he made boards, drew chalk lines, set up tents, and hung notes. When people asked him for the secret to being immune to anger, he never spoke of enduring it. He talked about the flow of small actions that could start right away. Putting events on a board, turning labeling words into describing ones, creating pauses with set time frames, making measurable facts public, dividing resources through systems rather than favors, recording what was stuck and committing to resolve it on time, forming verification groups when information was unclear, and having a place anyone could go when their heart burned hot. Those things were not pretty when told as stories, but they were beautiful once woven into daily life, and once life itself had changed. Even when anger came, it was only a passing guest through a village that already knew the way. After the holiday, the commune launched a campaign to improve youth playgrounds. The empty field by the canal had long been an informal soccer spot, often sparking fights over who got to play. He suggested marking 2 smaller fields instead of one big one, with rotating time slots for each group. Next to them, a wooden board listed 10 short rules, from replacing the ball to how to handle minor collisions. Along the canal's edge, he and the youth group set up a row of bamboo stakes tied with rope to keep the ball from falling into the water, both safer and less frustrating, sparing players from diving in to retrieve it. One afternoon, 2 groups arrived late at the same time. Voices began to rise, but after glancing at the schedule on the board, they switched turns within 3 sentences. The shouting faded because the structure itself stood there, giving reason no need to yell. At the agricultural cooperative, another issue arose. The seed rice shipment arrived late, so farmers sowed unevenly, some early, some late, some with water, some without. Complaints were sure to come. He suggested projecting a simple chart onto the wall, mapping the plots and prioritizing the low, flood-prone areas and those farthest from water. The plan would be updated every 2 days. The working group used 3 chalk colors: red for not yet distributed, yellow for in progress, and green for done. After just 1 session, the room was full, but the noise dropped to a soft murmur. Transparency left no space for suspicion. A visible schedule left impatience with nowhere to cling. At the high school, the exam period approached, and parents worried about cheating. He worked with the principal to design a simple procedure. Each student sealed their personal bag with a numbered paper sticker and signed their name. The bags were placed neatly on the rack. When leaving, each student removed their own seal. By letting the students seal their own belongings, the feeling of being controlled turned into a shared sense of responsibility. Alongside that was an anonymous feedback corner to report irregularities. The exams passed quietly, with only a few small suggestions taken in for the next term. When procedures respected the people involved, irritation from mistrust turned into awareness of shared standards. At the March market fair, the group selling traditional spices stood next to the one selling tech gadgets, creating 2 very different rhythms. During rush hours, the younger group's loudspeaker promoting blenders drowned out the older sellers' calls. The market managers invited both sides to meet with him. Without long debate, he proposed a quiet hour frame, 1 hour before lunchtime, giving the dry goods sellers a chance to close deals. In exchange, they accepted the corner spot with power outlets so the gadget team could stop dragging tangled wires. Both sides signed a 1-page agreement, kept at the management counter. The next day, the speakers went silent at the agreed time. The elders sold well, and the youth still had hours to demonstrate their products. A small fix, yet it trimmed the root of many frowns. At the health clinic, vaccination season brought long lines and short tempers. He suggested a 2-layer ticket system. The first layer divided time into half-hour blocks. The second gave order numbers within each block. Each family received a colored card with a short instruction sheet. The colors showed whether they were in the right time block, reducing crowding. The clinic added a temporary shade and a water jug. After 2 days, people said they no longer felt abandoned. They knew where they stood in the process. Anger, he noted, often erupts when people feel lost, give direction, and frustration fades. In the carpenter's hamlet, a new apprentice group opened for 3 early school leavers, boys quick to temper. He did not preach, He wrote weekly goals on a wooden board by the entrance. The first week, saw straight. The second, plain smooth. The third, fit joints. Each evening, the boys marked what they had accomplished. Whenever tension rose, the whole group stood before the board, pointed at that day's goal, and reminded one another to continue. When what must be done is right before the eyes, the urge to argue takes a step back. For young people, what bursts out easily is often what lacks direction. Give direction. Let the hands align with the eyes. The village's environmental team took on another problem: the habit of burning trash in the late afternoon. The smoke drifted into dinner hours, irritating neighbors. A ban would not work without a plan. He and the team created a separate collection schedule for dry waste, added 3 small gathering points instead of one large one, and made a clear sorting chart. Those who broke the rule were reminded, but the reminder came with a convenient option. After 2 weeks, the smoke plumes had visibly decreased. Everyone realized that much of daily irritation comes from poorly designed convenience. Fix the design, and the irritation loses ground. When a city sanitation worker took sudden leave, uncollected trash piled up, and residents grew upset. He proposed a 3-day contingency schedule. The neighborhood group split shifts, and the head of the lane used his tricycle to haul the waste to the transfer point. A task chart was posted at the alley entrance, and each completed shift was crossed off in red. By the 3rd day, the city team was back on schedule. In the middle of disruption, the sense of having one's hands on the wheel kept tempers from rising. When people have a concrete way to help, they waste less breath on complaint. A small business wanted to sponsor the stage for the village festival, but only if it could hang its logo exclusively on the communal gate. Opinions split. He said that no one dislikes sponsorship. What people dislike are unfair conditions. The solution was to set up sponsorship tiers. Each tier would have the right to display logos in proportionate areas, with the list and locations made public. The company still contributed. Their logo was placed in the game area, as the tier allowed, while the communal gate remained for everyone. No anger, just a rule. When the rule is clear, words become softer. In one family, a husband came home late several nights in a row, which upset his wife. They came to the reflection room. Instead of asking why he was late, he asked them both to write down 5 minimum actions for coming home late. Call ahead. Bring a light snack if dinner was not ready. Wash one's own dishes. Keep the television volume low. And say thank you. The list was stuck to their refrigerator door. After a week, when they returned, the sighs had turned into clear sentences. Much of anger, he noted, is an empty warehouse of facts. When the minimum rules are right there on the fridge, anger loses its hiding place. At a kindergarten, loud noise during nap time made the janitorial staff complain. The principal implemented a color card system hung outside each classroom. If a class was too noisy during quiet hours, the card turned yellow. If it happened again, it turned red, and the teacher worked with parents to remind the children. If the class stayed quiet for 3 consecutive days, the card returned to green, and they earned 10 minutes of tower building play in the yard. Color cards are visible signals. Avoiding vague scolding. Children understand signals faster than reprimands. When the signal is clear, the volume drops. A new cafe owner at the village edge played music loudly after 9 o'clock. The neighborhood had a noise rule, but enforcement was weak. He suggested buying a decibel meter and hanging it in the cafe, with the display facing customers. Whenever the sound exceeded the limit, the device's light flashed. The owner worried about losing customers, but after a week, realized that people did not leave because the music was soft. They left because they could not talk. The measurement helped him avoid arguments with neighbors, because there was now an objective witness in the room. Simple science cools tempers better than emotional confrontations. The district started a training program for village coordinators. He was in charge of a 30-minute practice session. Each group received a small kit, chalk, masking tape, markers, and a measuring tape. They had to handle 3 short scenarios: dividing the sidewalk between food stalls and pedestrians, arranging parking in a narrow lane, and scheduling shared drilling hours for home repairs. The group that used the fewest words and the most tools won praise. By the end of the session, everyone had a small poster to hang in their office. Fewer word battles, more visible signals, fewer accusations, more measurements. Such skills cost little but save many red faces. One afternoon, he visited his friend who ran the cafe at the village edge. The friend said one creative staff member wanted to host an experimental music night, but the neighbors feared the noise. They sat together and defined the trial zone by time and space, 1 night per month, within clear hours, with limited volume, inviting neighborhood representatives to attend, and collecting feedback afterward. When an experiment has a frame, it stops provoking anger and becomes a source of pride. The next morning, the villagers talked about a strange but pleasant night, new sounds. Yet everyone still slept well. Energy that could have become tension turned instead into connection. At the end of the year, he and the youth group held a small exhibition at the community hall titled, "Things That Stay Still But Keep Working." It displayed a model of the quiet tent, a replica of the family board, a map of the market boundaries, the classroom color cards, the sound meter, photos of the dust-shielding trees, a picture of the classroom's water basin, and the wooden goal boards from the carpentry workshop. Anyone stopping by could take home an idea that suited their own neighborhood. The exhibition needed no speaker. It needed objects that hands could touch. When hands touch, people remember longer, and get less irritated the next time a similar situation arises. On the night the exhibition closed, he sat outside watching the youth pack the boxes. One asked why he rarely talked about compassion but often mentioned boards, chalk, and schedules. He replied that compassion is the destination, but boards and chalk are the road. When someone is angry, they cannot hear about lofty virtues. They need a path they can see right then. Once they walk past their anger, they will understand why kindness matters. A road with signs makes each step less hesitant. A few months later, he received an invitation to speak in a mountain commune. The roads were rough, electricity unstable, and cell signal weak, yet the people were just like those in his village. They had markets, schools, alleys, and the same repeated frictions. He brought a small bag with chalk, markers, tape, and wooden boards. Together they drew market boundaries, built a quiet corner in the community hall, and made a rotating schedule for collecting water from the shared tank. There was no mention of the old water basin or the old stories, only simple actions placed in the right spots. A month later, the village head called from an old landline phone. He said people still argued, but not for long, and that this year's festival had not seen a single scuffle. He set the phone down and looked out into the garden. The things that stayed still were still working. The next morning, he returned to the temple porch. The breeze brushed the roof. The old starfruit tree swayed, and a few ripe fruits dropped onto the brick floor with neat sounds. He picked one up, split it in half, and shared it with the young student sweeping the yard. The boy said he had just helped 2 friends take turns at the soccer field using the time board. He nodded. A new generation was learning to build signposts right where they were needed. At that moment, he thought of his friend's question about the image of the passing guest. It was not a poetic metaphor. It was the state a community reaches when it has enough tools to remind people to pause before boiling over, enough channels for frustration to release, and enough transparency to keep suspicion from growing. When those 3 things are present, anger is only a traveler passing through, and the road it walks is the one that people hear, draw, and keep together every day. When the rainy season passed, the dirt road into the village began to dry, and potholes appeared like missing patches on a great piece of fabric waiting to be mended. The commune committee called on each hamlet to register one day for road work. Some were busy in the fields, others had children to care for, and finding a common schedule was hard. He and the youth group proposed a shift schedule divided into time blocks, each block lasting 2 hours, with specific tasks listed: digging soil, compacting the ground, watering to keep it firm. The board included a column for backup in case someone was absent and instructions on how to call a substitute. One copy was hung at the temple gate, another at the market. On the workday, there were no shouts, only the sound of shovels striking stones and footsteps moving in rhythm. Those who once grumbled about having to cover for others now looked at the board and clearly saw whose part was whose. By the end of the day, the road was smoother, and so were the voices. An old man passing by with his cane praised the schedule board for being tidy and easy to understand. He noted it in his book: when effort is visible and respected, anger finds no place to stay. The next issue appeared at the irrigation pump station. The machine was old, and the watering schedule overlapped. Some families opened the valve longer than their share, leaving the last ones in line worried about low pressure. He quickly gathered the field owners and suggested a marking system using bamboo pegs on the valve wheel. Each household had its own paint color. When opening the valve, they inserted their peg to mark the time, then removed it when done and returned it for the next user. A schedule was posted on a wooden pole by the canal, and the Daily Monitor took photos of it for the shared group chat so even those far away could follow along. From that day, arguments dropped sharply. By the next season, they added a thick notebook for a water log, with columns for incidents and solutions. Line by line, the handwriting grew steadier and turned into shared experience. No one spoke of patience or compassion, but thanks to a clear system, patience and compassion quietly took root without needing to be preached. One noon, the village loudspeaker announced that trucks carrying materials would pass through for 3 consecutive days. Some feared dust and noise. Others welcomed the extra customers for their shops. He suggested setting up a temporary pedestrian lane with rope dividers along the busy stretch, placing a speed limit sign at the road's entrance, and putting water tubs for hand-washing near the market to ease discomfort from the dust. The truck owners agreed, seeing that the rules were not unreasonable. The 3 days passed in order. Scattered complaints never became storms. From that, he wrote another line: when interests collide, build a foundation of basic safety first before discussing extras. A solid foundation softens tempers. At the community hall, the weekend repair club had become a routine. But recently tensions rose because some visitors demanded their items be fixed the same day. The volunteer craftsman grew tired and disheartened. He helped them design a new intake board with 3 types of cards. The quick card was for tasks under 15 minutes, such as tightening screws or gluing trim. The regular card was for jobs completed in 1 session. The waiting card was for those needing new materials. Each card had a clear number, with a note of thanks and care instructions printed on the back. Clear enough to guide, soft enough to please. By the end of the month, complaints dropped, and handwritten thank yous increased. Clarity does not dry out kindness. It gives kindness a frame so it does not spill. At the elementary school, the vice principal asked for help handling teasing among student groups. Instead of holding a criticism session, he suggested creating a quiet helper board. Children wrote on small slips of paper what they had done that week to help keep the class calm: lending a pen, tidying the reading corner, helping a friend with homework. The slips were posted in the hallway, and every Friday, the teacher and class chose 3 to read aloud. When good deeds are illuminated, the need for attention through mischief fades. Anger between friends cools because they begin to see the better parts of one another. He realized that sometimes preventing conflict is as simple as opening a window to let light into a dark corner. At the carpentry workshop, the craftsmen had agreed on procedures, but disagreements now arose over how to calculate wages. Some felt they were underpaid for harder tasks. He was not an accountant, but he helped them set up a board describing the difficulty levels of each step, with a point scale agreed upon before payments were made. Each group tested the scoring by reviewing one batch together. After 3 rounds, the scores aligned closely, and the whispers stopped. What people often call fairness, he thought, is really the feeling that numbers match reality. When that feeling is full, resentment has no ground to grow. One light rain afternoon, a couple came to the reflection room about conflicts in caring for an elderly parent. Both said they were exhausted and felt wronged. He gave no advice right away. Instead, he asked them to make a weekly task chart on a large sheet of paper, color-coded by day and by person, with rest hours included. They posted it on the elder's door. 3 days later, they returned. The husband said they had stopped blaming each other because the chart now spoke for the workload. The wife said seeing the other's schedule softened her heart. Kindness, he noted, is born when people can see each other's burdens. No grand moral lesson is needed, only a clear picture of shared work. At the market fair, a vendor woman often got angry with customers out of fear of being underpaid. He stood nearby for a while and saw her price board written in haste, numbers uneven, and items arranged messily. He suggested she reorganize by category, make a new, neat price board, add bulk discounts, and place a sample basket with a scale for customers to check weights themselves. 3 small adjustments made questions simpler. Her defensiveness eased, and her loud tone softened. When trade rules are clear, pride relaxes. The fear of losing out is the spark of irritation. Remove the spark, and the fire never starts. The cooperative proposed that the village host an inter-village sports festival. The fields for soccer, tug of war, and chess were ready, but potential clashes loomed. He and the coordination team made a 1-page rule sheet in large letters, posted at every gate. The sheet had 2 sections. The first summarized game rules, the second summarized speech rules, such as no arguing with referees, and any appeal must be filed at the registration desk within 10 minutes after a match. The desk had 3 representatives randomly drawn from the 3 villages, whose decision stood for the day and could be reviewed later. The festival was noisy but not chaotic, lively but not excessive. When it ended, teams took group photos. Spectators went home without carrying lingering anger. Sustainable joy, he wrote, is joy with rules on the field. Another tricky issue was noise at night from a newly opened garment workshop. Instead of calling the commune police to file a report immediately, he proposed a short meeting with sound measurements. They placed meters at 3 points, measured by time frame, recorded the numbers, and took photos. The owner saw the clear readings and agreed to rearrange machines and add soundproof panels. The neighbors, seeing goodwill, accepted a seasonal schedule for earlier quiet hours and later starts during peak season. No one spoke of sacrifice. Everyone simply referred to numbers and time slots. Facts, he thought, are bridges across the river of mistrust. At the commune clinic, the pharmacy counter often jammed because patients could not hear their names called. He suggested issuing small cards with pre-printed patient numbers. Each person handed their card to the counter, and a small screen displayed the number being served. The pharmacist no longer needed to shout, and the hallway grew calm. Many sounds of irritation, he realized, that people think come from personality, often come from volume. Lower the volume at the right spot, and the air cools, like lowering the heat on a simmering pot of soup. In summer, the youth group organized a soft skills class for high school students. He helped them stage a mock job interview, assigning roles for interviewer, interviewee, and observer. After each round, the observers gave feedback in 3 clear parts: what went well, what could improve, and what to try next time. Structured feedback turned criticism into learning. Those who used to flare up at being corrected began to listen and take notes. When the habit of receiving information is trained, Anger in the classroom has fewer chances to grow. At the end of the harvest season, every household was busy drying rice. Yards were narrow, clotheslines overlapped, and quarrels easily sparked over dust. He suggested that each family paint a thin boundary line in front of their yard, with shared drying hours, morning, afternoon, and evening, scheduled by the neighborhood team. Anyone who needed to swap could mark it on the shared board. The first 3 days were clumsy, but by the 4th day, the rhythm settled. The dust did not vanish, but people frowned less. When one's share is clear, the heart grows more generous. Another invitation came from the district, asking for his input on improving the citizen service process at the one-stop office. The place often echoed with frustration from people who waited long without knowing which documents they were missing. He proposed a process map for 3 main types of cases, displayed right at the entrance, each with a list of required papers and a self-help table for filling forms. Visitors submitting files received a progress card with 7 boxes, stamped at each step. Those missing papers were guided to the right counter to complete their files. After 1 month, complaints dropped sharply, and staff no longer faced harsh words. When people can see their path, tension unties like a knot released in the right spot. During fruit harvest season, visitors from afar came in crowds, and prices fluctuated wildly. Some sellers began to cheat on weights, sparking loud arguments. The village put up a sign at the road leading into the orchards. It showed 3 price levels updated daily by the wholesale market, and 2 simple principles. Scales must be placed on a flat table with the display facing the customer, and every customer may taste 1 fruit at the stall. Simple rules, but set at eye level. Once they were in place, voices softened. He noted that much of anger comes from hands unable to touch fairness. Once hands can touch it, mouths need not shout. On the last day of the school year, the school held a session on emotional care. Several students shared their past conflicts with friends and teachers. He did not tell them to suppress their feelings. Instead, he asked them to turn harsh sentences into poetry. Each student wrote 1 sentence that had made them sad, then rewrote it as a description of an event and a need. "I want to control the group" became, "I hope for clear roles in the group." "I dislike my classmates' personality" became, "I need some quiet time when working." The exercise did not erase conflict, but it turned clenched fists into open palms. Open palms can point the way, closed ones only know how to strike. Late in the afternoon, he returned to the temple porch. The water basin was still there, an old, familiar object, but he no longer needed to borrow it to speak. What once needed saying had become boards, chalk, schedules, and symbols everyone understood. A child running by paused to look at the roadwork schedule board. An old woman on her way to the market glanced at the clear price list. A carpenter stood before his goal board. A factory worker held a progress slip at the one-stop office. Each person knew their next step. Knowing the next step means knowing the way. When everyone knows the way, anger no longer takes anyone by the hand and leads them astray. It may appear, but it is guided toward an exit already drawn, and behind it are the ongoing tasks, the meal on the stove, and the small but steady voices of daily life. In that continuity, the meaning of calmness no longer lies in endurance but in the art of building systems. Systems that keep harsh words from turning into heavy days, and keep people still able to see one another. The first monsoon winds of early winter brought dry air from the sandy fields. The bamboo leaves rustled like a hand brushing over paper. The village entered its year-end reflection period. The commune invited representatives from each hamlet and volunteer groups to the community hall to record concrete changes achieved over the year. He sat at the long table. Before him the summary sheets each group had brought. Every sheet followed the same format to avoid boasting. 3 parts. What had been done? What measurable result followed? And what new habit had formed? Those responsible read aloud slowly. without emphasis, as if pouring a stream of water for everyone to drink together. The quiet tent in the market had reduced long-lasting disputes to 1/3. The roadwork schedule had nearly eliminated absences. The sound meter in the cafe had turned a confrontation the previous month into a conversation about interior design and acoustics. The list was plain, but each line was a link, together forming a chain. When his turn came, he spoke only about what had not gone well. There were times the coordination group trusted too much in signs and forgot to stand nearby when newcomers still felt unsure. There were times the public boards were hung too high for the elderly to read. There were times the reflection room was used just to store complaints, without steps for resolution. He suggested gentle improvements. Each signboard should include a line showing where to find guidance. Each public board should have a large print version hung lower. Every note pinned in the reflection room must include a removal date and the name of the person responsible. The room held its breath, then exhaled. His words carried no blame, only a way to repair. Some time later, the district announced a relocation project, moving one neighborhood from the lowlands to build a retention reservoir. As soon as the news spread, people began calculating gains and losses. Some feared leaving their homes. Some saw opportunity. Conflict had not yet taken shape, but already had a voice. He and the youth group proposed a series of small group dialogues organized by clusters of households. Each meeting had a clear structure. The first half hour was for presenting the relocation plan with colored diagrams and a timeline. The next half hour was for residents to mark unclear points on their copies. The last half hour was for sorting questions, which needed immediate answers, which could wait, and which required on-site inspection. Each meeting ended with a simple record, sent to everyone that same evening. No one was allowed to make promises without evidence, and no one could speak beyond the allotted time. After 4 sessions, angry voices faded, replaced by specific questions. When exactly would the transport trucks run? Which households with elderly members needed help moving? Would the new farmland have an irrigation system? When transition entered the calendar, fear turned into work. On relocation day, some cried, some smiled, but no one shouted. The convoys moved in order. Each truck carried a passenger list with phone numbers, and the cluster leader rode in the last vehicle. At the new site, everyone received a small handbook listing what to do during the first week. That simple booklet prevented countless headshakes, because refusals often grow when hands have nothing concrete to do. One morning, the commune received an invitation from a university to take part in a study on community behavior. The officials asked if he was willing to share the records from his notebook. He did not agree right away. He discussed it with the coordination group, setting a principle. Data must serve those who created it first, not be turned into certificates for display. In the end, they agreed to cooperate on one condition: that every publication must include an open practice guide so that others could apply it. The research team came to the village 3 times. They took notes, they observed, and they sat quietly in the reflection tent like guests learning how to close a door gently. The report they sent back neither praised nor criticized. It stated that the village's mechanisms worked best when someone in the middle knew how to keep an even tone and how to yield the floor to others. He read it, folded it, and smiled. Science had not produced a new secret, but it had affirmed the sense of being on the right path. And what needed to be preserved, he thought, was not a handful of brave individuals, but the practice of training those who would continue the work. So, the next season, he started a small course called the Rhythm Keepers class. Every Wednesday evening, a group of 5 learned together for 4 weeks. In the first week, they practiced describing events without labeling. In the second, they learned to make quick boards and use chalk properly. In the third, they practiced facilitating dialogues with hand signals and eye contact. In the final week, they went into the field, each accompanied by an observer who gave feedback afterward. There were no certificates, no awards, only a new duty roster for the following week. Gradually, new faces began taking shifts in the reflection tent. The public boards carried handwriting everyone could read. Meetings had people who knew how to bring the group back to the question and how to stop at the right moment. When human capacity multiplies, the work does not break even when the old hands are busy or tired. Then a crisis struck at the start of summer. On the provincial road, a chain collision caused hours of traffic blockage, and rumors spread quickly online, reaching the village. Families with members working away from home panicked as if sparks had touched dry straw. Calls flooded the clinic, the commune office, and the school. Within minutes, the phone lines jammed, and voices on both ends began to rise. He and his group quickly switched to a cluster-based communication system. Each lane chose one representative to receive official updates from traffic police, reporting only 3 states: one-way open, two-way open with delays, and fully cleared. No numbers unless verified, no descriptions of the scene, to avoid feeding anxiety for any household with someone still unaccounted for. The lane representative made the calls directly. 2 hours later, the traffic was cleared, and the village exhaled. The lesson was added to the notebook: in crisis, avoid exaggeration by using state-based words only. When states are clearly defined, the mind has less room for speculation. From that incident, the youth group proposed setting up a simple signal board for storm season. 3 colors mounted at the village entrance, each corresponding to a level of readiness. Green for normal, check roof tiles and drainage. Yellow for preparation, reinforce doors, trim dry branches, secure loose items. Red for shelter, stay indoors, activate the evacuation points if needed. Each color came with a timestamp for the next check-in. When new data arrived, the watchkeeper changed the color and sent an update. No need for loud announcements. Passers-by already knew what to do. That year's storms still blew off some roofs and toppled some trees. But there was no more chaos from people unsure which color they belonged to. When the storms passed, sighs turned into stories of tasks completed. In daily life, tiny grains of conflict still appeared like sand. A little boy scribbled on the wall of the community hall. The guard was about to scold him, and his mother was embarrassed. He suggested letting the boy join the repair club instead, to sand an old wooden board, repaint a small section, and sign his name in the corner. The next day, the boy brought friends to see the new patch of paint and proudly showed what he had done. Instead of letting a small mistake turn into a bad label, the village turned it into a warm-up exercise for useful skill. After that, the reflection room added a section for children's mistakes. Green errors were from not knowing, yellow from rushing, red from intention. Each came with a matching repair task. No preaching, just the habit that consequences are lessons, not punishments. On a free day, he and the youth group visited his old teacher at the village school. The teacher said the class now had a weekly sharing session. Each student chose one thing from the week that had made them angry, wrote it down, and promised to describe it differently the next week, using words of observation, not judgment. "I want to control the group" became "I hope for clear role assignments." "I dislike my classmates' attitude" became "I need quiet space when working." After a month, there were fewer harsh words and more sentences about real needs. The teacher said that now, whenever tension arose, the students would pick up chalk and draw a line across the classroom, pacing along it like a breath until their voices softened, then stepping back to their desks. He smiled as he realized that the idea of the chalk line had left the marketplace and entered classrooms, becoming a quiet habit of self-regulation. What was trained in one place was finding its way into others through the path of people. The village gradually gained a reputation as a place to learn from. Visitors came hoping for an inspirational talk, but he kept to his old method. He led them through 3 specific points: the quiet tent, where they sat for 5 minutes. The public board, where they posted a mock notice. The reflection room, where they pinned a thought and wrote its removal date. When leaving, each group received a small package, markers, rolls of tape, thin wooden boards, and a guide sheet of 7 steps. No one left with a magic phrase. Everyone left with a toolkit. He believed that simple tools were a shared language that transcended differences in voice and custom. At times, he also faced resistance. Some complained there were too many boards, too many rules, making life heavy. He did not argue. He suggested removing the boards from one alley for 3 weeks and counting the number of loud disputes. The results showed that not every alley needed many tools. Some needed just one rule and one person to remind others. From then on, the village agreed on a principle of minimalism. Only place tools where signs of need appear. And adjust by time. Any board unused for 6 months would be stored away, if needed again. Brought back. A system that breathes, expanding and contracting as needed, is the secret to avoiding fatigue. Immunity to anger, he realized, is not about covering life with a blanket of tolerance, but about placing small anchors in the right places so that frustration does not drag on. At the end of the season, he visited his mother in a distant village. The narrow lane, the old pond bank, and the jackfruit tree marked with time-worn cuts, all familiar. His mother was frailer now, but her smile was the same. Over dinner, conversations drifted to relatives and neighbors, the usual places where irritation hides. He did not lecture. He simply asked if she wanted to try sticking a paper note on the cupboard, listing 3 things they should do before discussing difficult topics. She laughed, saying she was too old to be a student. But that night, they wrote it anyway. Take medicine on time. Call the neighborhood head for a sturdy chair. Fold and put away the old papers. After completing the 3 tasks, the conversation about others naturally grew lighter. He understood then that the meaning of all his years in the village was not in reputation or training sessions, but in the ability to bring a habit home and make one evening easier. Back at the temple, he thought of what to prepare for the next season. 10 bamboo poles to replace, 3 boards to repaint, the 7-step guide to adapt for town settings, and the rhythm keepers class to expand into daytime sessions for night shift workers. He gathered the youth, divided the list, and discussed how to measure progress with just enough numbers. They laughed, footsteps echoing under the porch, pens gliding over paper. No one mentioned the word peace. No one said happiness. But the way they divided the tasks, the way they made room for the quiet voices, the way they noted check-back dates, all of it was the tangible shape of a life that had learned not to let anger become the one in charge. That night, the air was cool and the sky cloudless. He stepped into the yard and looked across the fence toward the road where potholes had just been filled. A few patches of asphalt were still dark, and the light from a nearby house fell upon them, making the road look like a newly stitched piece of cloth. He thought about the long path from that small water basin on the temple porch to the many quiet tools now working silently across the village. That path had not been drawn by a sudden flash of enlightenment, but by thousands of small adjustments, each one made when anger was about to pull someone too far away. The meaning of being here, he realized, was not to make people stop feeling anger. Anger would still come, like a gust of wind. The meaning was to give people handrails to hold when the wind blew hard, to give them boards so they would not lose their way, and to give them framed pauses so that waves could retreat. When those handrails were steady, those who followed would stumble less at the same old places. When those boards were right, newcomers would know where to slow their steps. When those pauses had a schedule, harsh words would have fewer chances to turn into heavy days. And in that way, a village that knows how to give direction is not a poetic image, but a way of living, one that can be learned, shared, adjusted, and carried to places still lacking a handrail. The following spring, The district decided to host a week-long gathering for villages along the small river to exchange their experiences in community management. News spread. Some were excited, others doubtful. Some said, "Every village is different. You cannot replicate this." He did not argue. He suggested holding a trial open day first. On that day, the village did not build a stage or hang flags. It simply opened the places where daily work happened. At the quiet tent in the market, they hung an extra poster of 3 steps. At the reflection room, they added a board listing support persons. At the public board by the communal hall, they pinned mock scenarios for visitors to solve using the existing procedures. The young volunteers divided into small groups to guide visitors along different routes. The market route showed how to draw chalk lines and rephrase words. The school route showed the color cards, the goal boards, and the quiet corner. The carpentry workshop route showed the quality criteria and the point scale. The riverside route showed the irrigation diagram marked by colored bamboo pegs. Visitors heard no lecture, but their hands touched chalk, markers, paper, and numbers on the boards. When they left, many quietly took photos of the sample boards to recreate them in their own villages. A farmer from a neighboring village whispered to him, "Doing it this way, even the ones who love to argue will have a hard time, because what they would argue about is already right there in front of their eyes." Mid-season, an unexpected conflict broke out with the upstream village. They accused his village of taking more irrigation water beyond the agreed schedule, leaving their fields dry. Tension spread through messages, and if handled poorly, a long-standing friendship could have cracked. He asked for a meeting by the shared canal. At the old boundary mark, there were 8 people, 4 from each side. He did not defend. Instead, he suggested drawing a quick water chart for the past week, using both villages' logs, to compare time slots. When the chart was up, the difference became clear. 2 delayed valve releases had occurred because the new shift team had not yet learned the auto-release mechanism. The irrigation officer admitted the mistake. Both sides agreed to form a rotating joint team to monitor the valves for 2 weeks. Whoever was on duty would photograph the valve chart and send it to the other village each night. On the way back, an elder from the upstream village shook his hand and said, "What calmed me was not the apology, but seeing the path of correction." An apology, he thought, is like a breeze. A path of correction is like a row of trees. The breeze passes, but the trees remain. The village was not only about what happened on the streets. At home, there were still small thorns. One evening, the son of the noodle vendor got into trouble at a gaming shop, upsetting neighbors and tiring his parents. They came to the reflection room, voices still sharp at the end of sentences. He asked them to break the issue into 3 parts. The first part, the boys' time use rules. The second, the shop's regulations. The third, how the 2 households would talk when something happened. For the first, the boy proposed his own commitment, fixed hours for games, study, and 1 daily household task. For the second, the shop owner agreed to post clear rules, shut down on time, and add a small reading corner. For the third, the 2 families agreed to communicate through short, structured messages instead of blame. The agreement was pinned up with a review date. After a month, the gaming shop still had customers. The boy no longer appeared on the noise list, and the families spoke in calm, concise sentences. He wrote in his notebook, "In places where emotions flare quickly." These 3 parts are like the 3 legs of a stool. Lose one, and the whole table falls. At the start of summer, a team of provincial engineers came to inspect the small bridge crossing the Western Canal. It had deteriorated badly. They proposed building a new bridge within 3 months, but the temporary detour would be long. Vendors worried about losing customers. Farmers worried about extra travel. He proposed a transitional plan. For the first 3 weeks, Workers would build a temporary steel beam bridge for pedestrians and bicycles. The main bridge would be built in two halves, keeping one lane open for motorbikes and carts during scheduled hours. The lane schedule was posted at both ends, with guards to direct traffic during peak times. The village formed a team to maintain order, and the tea stall offered free warm water at noon for those crossing. Through those 3 months, irritation never hardened into habit. The difficulty passed because there was a clear path through it. When the new bridge was inaugurated, everyone could read a small board at its entrance listing 8 lessons from the repair season, to save future teams from starting over again. While the systems around the village grew steadier, he began noticing a quiet but important gap. Many of the elderly still lived withdrawn, seldom going out or speaking. They made no noise, so they were often overlooked. Yet silence too long can turn into hurt. He met with the Elders Association and suggested something light, a weekly session called Story Hour. Not for heroic tales, but for sharing how they tended their fields in the old days, how they handled family matters during harder times. The youth came to listen, took notes, and turned those into small instruction sheets to hang in homes. From that point, the schedule for drying rice and the schedule for cooling tempers began to meet. Traditional wisdom quietly became a modern tool. An old woman who used to scold her grandchildren for laziness became the one teaching the whole village how to arrange offerings calmly and efficiently. When respect finds a place to hold on, gentle reproach turns into guidance. A small root of anger is transformed right at the base of loneliness. Then came a challenge from afar. An advertising company wanted to install a large screen at the entrance of the market, displaying commercial content all day long. Some people liked the modern touch, while others worried about the noise and glare. It could not be decided simply by preference. He suggested borrowing a screen to simulate a day and measure 2 things: noise level and brightness at different times. The results showed that in the morning, both sound and light were acceptable, but from 11 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, the readings exceeded the limit. The village had to choose between 2 options. The first was to not install the screen at all. The second was to install it but only operate it from 7 to 10 in the morning and from 3 to 6 in the evening, with limited volume and at least 20% of the content dedicated to local information. The company chose the second option. After a month, a survey board hung at the market showed that people had accepted it. Commercial benefit and peaceful living had found their balance. It was not a victory or defeat, just a new chalk line drawn on the ground. In the rhythm-keeping class, a new student drew attention. She was a garment worker, quiet, with serious eyes. In the 3rd week, she asked to practice as a coordinator at the quiet tent. During her shift, 2 men argued over a small debt. She did not let them ramble. She restated the descriptive rules, set up a board to mark the timeline of the transaction, and asked that whoever spoke first should look at the board instead of looking into the other's eyes. After 15 minutes, their voices softened. After 19, they agreed on a repayment date. She did not deliver a moral speech. She just kept the rhythm and let their hands touch the schedule. The next day, she was invited to take the 7th shift at the quiet tent. He watched from a distance and realized that the coordinators were the true insurance for the system's order, not the inspiring lessons. When autumn came, a university proposed to build an experimental model for sociology students. They wanted to stay in the village for a week to observe and suggest improvements. He agreed under 2 conditions. First, every proposal had to come with a tool or process that could actually be implemented, not just analysis. Second, villagers had the right to respond and choose what to test. One group of students suggested hanging ready-to-use helmets at the bus stop, purchased by the village, with a small donation box to gradually cover the cost. Another group suggested adding a separate lane for bicycles through the narrow section. Both ideas were accepted for trial. After 2 weeks, the rate of wearing helmets increased. Minor accidents decreased. and bicycles no longer squeezed in with motorbikes at the bend. Those numbers appeared on the public board in front of the communal hall, not to praise the students, but to affirm that data was what guided the softening of voices. Another boost came from an innovation contest held by the province. The village submitted a toolkit that included chalk, wooden boards, markers, colored bamboo pegs, a noise meter, and a sample public chart printed into a handbook. The set won second prize. The reward was a small amount, just enough to buy another noise meter and a few large boards. Outsiders praised it, but villagers did not take much pride. They knew the real value was not in the award, but in reducing a few unnecessary loud quarrels each day. Still, the recognition made it easier to ask for volunteers to take shifts at the quiet tent or to gain support for testing a new procedure. Reputation, if used as a key to unlock collaboration, was useful. If used as decoration, it got in the way. One day, the boy who once stirred water in the temple basin, now an electrician, brought his girlfriend home to ask permission for their wedding. They wanted it simple, without loudspeakers or smoke cannons. To avoid disturbing the neighbors, he suggested hanging a wedding schedule board at the communal hall so families could coordinate procession times and feasts to avoid overlap. The board also had sections for parking assistants and sound supervisors. Weddings that season went smoothly. Everyone was happy. No neighbors frowned. Traditions remained intact. Order was preserved, and joy did not turn into annoyance in anyone's memory. Winter came, and the north wind grew strong. One night, a wood processing workshop outside the village caught fire, and the smoke drifted over, filling the air with a pungent smell. People panicked. He and the response team set up a temporary station distributing masks and warm water, updating the situation every 2 hours on a board. When the fire was out, he asked the environmental team to assess the effects on the elderly and children, advising households to close windows facing the wind for 2 days and to wipe surfaces with warm water. No one knew exactly who to thank, but everyone felt they had not been abandoned amid the smoke. In uncertainty, having names to call and small plans to follow kept anger from flaring up. Anxiety was guided through by sheets of paper posted in the right places. At the end of the year, he accepted an invitation to speak at a large cultural center in the province. The topic was how to turn small tools into a soft discipline for the community. He shared 10 situations, from dividing the market area to rescuing a stuck harvester, from the reflection room to the public board, from the colored bamboo pegs to the noise meter. The hall was silent, not because anyone was mesmerized by his speech, but because everyone realized they could take a piece of a tool home. A young official asked if he feared the tools would become mere formality. He said yes, if no one stood beside them. A board cannot replace a person. Chalk cannot replace attitude. That is why rhythm-keeping classes must continue. When someone stands beside the tool, it lives. When the tool lives, frustration has no time to build a house. On a late winter day, he returned to his teacher's grave. The air was cold, the wind short, and the sky clear enough to see a few stars not yet faded. He told his teacher about the growing dust shielding trees, the stable shifts at the quiet tent, the rhythm-keeping class that had trained enough people, the new bridge, the wedding board, and the helmets hanging at the bus stop. He did not say the village no longer argued. It still had hot tempers, anger, and harsh words, but harsh words no longer turned into harsh days. Anger no longer decided the fate of collective work. The difference was that whenever voices rose, people knew where to reach. The board to see, the chalk to draw, the peg to lock, the meter to trust, the schedule to arrange, and the person to stand between. When those anchors exist, hearts find their path. The road once drawn now speaks through every step. In January, a group from a coastal region called to ask for advice as they prepared for their crowded whale festival. He and 2 students went there. They did not give lectures, they brought their tools. They set up a festival version of the quiet tent, placed a public board showing the parade route, sound limits, and parking areas. They suggested a volunteer schedule by time blocks, listing contacts for each. They proposed a lost and found corner with a notebook, ruler, camera, and phone. The festival went on as loud as every year but without chaos. Everyone left with a small story about something that made them less irritated. An old drummer said the wall hook for his cane saved him from forgetting it. A drink vendor praised the clear hallway layout that kept her stall visible. Simple words like those made him believe that silent tools could truly travel far. Returning home, he set to work writing a briefer guide than the old one, called 12 Things You Can Do Immediately When Loud Words Arise. First, put the event up on a board. Second, change labels into descriptions. Third, draw a temporary boundary to stop collisions. Fourth, schedule the removal and assign who will remove it. Fifth, use measuring rods or measuring devices when possible. Sixth, categorize work into response and creative building. Seventh, make minimal facts public. Eighth, keep a channel for error correction into the system. Ninth, divide tasks by ballots or cards. Let hands touch. 10th, pilot within a small frame before scaling up. 11th, train the next rhythm keeper. 12th, simplify tools to real need. Eliminate what is redundant. It is a slim booklet. Brown paper cover. Clear black lettering. The reader will not see flowery sentences. Only a pathway. The year ends with a silent meeting. Each group speaks for 2 minutes. No one tells many stories. Each gives one number, one adjustment, one small story. The person in charge of the tent reports that the number of cases entering the tent increased but the average time decreased. The environmental team says afternoon smoke counts are only 2/10 of what they were the year before. The school says color cards help classes stay quiet during the nap hour 8 out of 10 days. The woodworking shop says harsh shouts have become rare. The sound of machines more even. The market says pathways are less blocked. And the satisfaction rate, measured by monthly ballots, increased. The committee says complaints dropped. Suggestions increased. He only reminds them that next year, everything needs to be renewed in 2 areas. The language on the board must be updated in the style of youth speech. The Rhythm Keeper team must add skills for handling multi-generation family conflicts. Everyone nods. They go home. Cold wind follows. But no one shivers out of fear that someday anger will drag them away. They have learned how to place hands on invisible but firm handrails. On the final night, he sits on the porch. On the desk lies a notebook open to a blank page. He writes one line for himself. Do not wait until everyone understands. Do until everyone can use. When people can use, loud words will naturally quiet. Wind passes over the roof. The starfruit tree quietly stirs. Somewhere a dog barks twice then is silent. Outside on the road, a few car lights stretch into trails. The village sleeps, but motionless things are still doing their work. The board is still hung. The tent still there. The reflection room still has pins. The bamboo latch still awaits a hand to fasten. A new day will come with new collisions, by the same old ways. And it is there that the meaning of immunity to anger is not an empty promise, but a continuous rhythm done by steady hands, repeated enough to carry a community through windy seasons without cracking from small collisions, without weariness from heavy words, and without losing the way when someone suddenly raises voice. The path is laid. The travelers will themselves know how to lower their voices enough to hear their own footsteps and the footsteps of the neighbor. Entering early summer, a food company selects the village as a contract buy-in point for agricultural produce. The happy news comes with worry over the fine print in the dense contract. The people are not used to reading them. The agriculture team invites a young rural lawyer to explain, but he proposes that first all clauses be turned into a single easy-read page placed in the village hall. 1 clause per line, accompanied by real farm examples. The board has 3 columns: clause, example, Action if disputes arise. Villagers hold the contract up to that sheet like holding rice in sunlight. Immediately seeing what is the floor price. What is a quality bonus? What is the penalty for delays? In the afternoon, two households want to walk away because they fear weight undercount. The company agrees to place a mutual verification scale under cooperative management, with the number displayed on a screen visible to both. When a hand is placed on the public scale beam, the sound of frustration falls like soil falling from roots after rain. In the first week, a few issues crop up and are recorded in an incident log with corrective steps. By week 2, the path runs more smoothly. Locals realize that having a big partner does not guarantee dispute. Disputes only swell when terms are vague and measures invisible. While the fields are in season, the high school hosts a talk about online schemes and civil debate. The kids are used to phones. News travels faster than wind, but they are not used to pausing before they hit send. He does not tell them to abandon social media. He lays out a table with 4 cards. A. Read carefully card asks questions. A. Verify source card. A. Speak descriptively card. And a. Wait 15 minutes card. Each group receives a hypothetical scenario, an old image with background cut, a rumor about teachers, a personal insult. The students take turns holding a card at the proper moment, noticing their urge to fire off hot hands diminish when there is rhythm. At the end, the class establishes a digital calm corner, where the list of steps before posting is hung. A month later, the school's voluntary fact-checking group operates steadily. Fabricated news finds little room to live. Adults in the village learn in reverse from children and form a shared verification group for market, school, workshop, health station. The method is the same, the tool the same, only the context differs. A hand-weaving textile workshop at the village edge receives a large order from the city. The loom rhythm speeds up. Breath quickens. The workshop leader is strict. The workers quick to flare. He comes, does not preach about professional ethics, but simply hangs a progress board dividing shifts, each shift with reasonable goals, and a feedback frame of 3 short daily lines, flows, obstacles, proposals. Each week they hold a 15-minute stand-up meeting. Everyone looks at the board, not each other. After 2 weeks, loud voices during work sharply decline. The most prominent sound is now the loom's steady rhythm. The workshop leader tells him that when goals and feedback have a place, commands become less necessary. Anger finds fewer reasons to emerge. A simmering conflict also appeared at the temple between a group of young people who enjoy weekend campfire music and an older group who prefer quiet. Both sides had reason, each with their own. He proposed trying a 2-tier schedule. Tier 1 would be a time slot for light music outdoors, with an acceptable volume limit. Tier 2 would be a silent slot inside the main hall and along the corridors, with clear signs posted, and a noise meter hung on a porch column. The youth group retains the right to play within their time slot so long as the volume reading does not exceed the limit. The older group retains their right to quiet in the defined space. After a few weekends, the two sides reminded each other, without needing a referee. Respect grew from visible boundaries, not vague advice. One early morning, the commune health team reported that dengue fever had increased in 2 hamlets. Irritated, people blamed each other for leaving stagnant water. He and the neighborhood team chalked a map of the lanes on the cement floor, marking symbols for water pools, clogged drains, plant pots. 3 groups wore 3 different colored hats, proceeded to mark as they walked, and at the end of the day photographed the board and recorded on paper. The one whose house was initially marked red was angry, but when he saw that many neighbors also had marks, he grabbed a broom and began cleaning, because he saw the matter lay in his own hands. By the end of the week, dengue declined slowly but surely. The irritation fell quickly, because no one was singled out as the only culprit. At the commune one-stop station, the issuance of new identity cards caused a long queue. A few people complained. A few heavy words flew. He suggested placing a simple procedural chart with illustrated steps. Add a desk to fill in forms before entering the room. Provide pens, and assign guides in morning and afternoon shifts. A small board shows estimated times for each group. Someone uses a loudspeaker to call group numbers rather than names. 2 days later, lines were still long but harsh words were gone. When everyone knows where they are in the journey, they clash less with staff and flail fewer words like little knives. At the commune sports field, a children's soccer tournament brought joy, but tempers could flare over disputed plays. The organizers invited him to delineate seating zones for parents and zones for coaches. Post a one-page code of conduct in large readable text stating the complaint path and times. The referee is backed by the code of conduct, not just by the black shirt. The final match was tense but did not break down. After the event, parents requested the boards stay up for future years. Fairness needs a code of process, not hope. One night a massive power outage occurred, and complaints surged. He and the rapid response team immediately set up an information point at the village hall. Using a board and marker to post 3 status markers from the official electric utility channel. Red means the fault is being handled. Yellow is partial restoration. Green is full restoration. Beside it is a board of safety tips and a table for sharing flashlights and spare batteries. When information is displayed, people pause to read, borrow batteries, speak quietly, and need not shout into telephone wires at staff. A blackout is inconvenient, but inconvenience can pass in order if the path is lit by letters. In the Western Hill area, a minor landslide blocked a shortcut. A few work groups fumed at having to take detours. He did not rush to reopen. He posted an information board at the entrance to the route, describing risk and estimated fixed time, along with a map of 3 alternate routes. Newcomers can look and choose. Youth groups painted arrows on the road surface. After 3 days, the ground stabilized. The road reopened. No accident occurred, and no harsh words stuck. Often, irritation arises simply because people are not given a map. A tech company invited the village to pilot a field reporting app by phone. Many elders do not use smartphones and are hesitant. He insisted on an analog version alongside a paper suggestion box at the market. Each slip with 3 short lines. Anyone who encounters a problem writes it, and the person in the quiet tent enters it into the system every afternoon. The digital channel lives. The paper channel does not die. The older generation is not left behind. The anger from feeling disrespected has no place to grow. The app collected data, and the village sent handwritten thank you notes to contributors. A film crew wished to borrow the temple scenery to film a family quarrel scene. Villagers felt uneasy about negative portrayal. He did not forbade it, he proposed conditions. The quarrel may not be shot in the main hall. Volume must stay under the meter's limit, and the crew must hold a sharing session afterward about respectful filmmaking. The crew agreed, revised script, and held the sharing session at the community center. The villagers saw that the filmmakers also had discipline, and prejudice eased. Mutual respect is a boundary by signature and measurement, not a boundary by emotion. In the Rhythm Keeper class, a new lesson was introduced: practicing response when accused. Each trainee practiced shifting from a personal label to a specific event. From, "You were always late," to, "Today I was late by 10 minutes because of traffic. I will notify ahead and make up time." From, "You often cause trouble," to, "This time your voice interrupted the meeting. May I ask you to raise your hand in turn?" They learned not to retaliate with new labels, but to put the event on the table like placing a glass of water. A glass of water does not heat up. Observers see the glass and feel less heat. The Senior Citizen Association proposed reopening calligraphy and measuring calculation classes for the youth. Because the elders once measured fields, houses with bamboo rulers and strings, and computed swiftly in their heads. The children hesitated at first, but when the lessons tied to real tasks in the market and fields, They liked them. One session, the elders taught marking slope using a water tube, estimating weight with buckets and carrying poles. The lesson, which seemed old, turned into simple measurement tools to resolve disputes over water flow and weight in the market. Those living rulers in memory became modern tools, softening irritation born of people not sharing the same measure. A youth group volunteered to map all shade trees in the village, recording their height, canopy size, health, risk of falling. The map was posted in the hall. In storm season, people just look at it to choose where to shelter bicycles or goods. They also included a watering schedule for drought season so that trees do not die of thirst. Some initially laughed at being free, but when the sun blazed, the shade saved an entire row of stalls from scorching. The laughter turned to praise. The irritation from heat found a specific shade to turn off against. Inside homes, small matters still kindle big fires. A family argued because the child was poor at math. The hot-tempered father scolded. The child withdrew. He did not speak of love or sacrifice. He suggested scheduling a 20-minute joint study using a descriptive method. The parent reads the problem slowly. The child restates the problem in their own words. The parent may not judge right or wrong in the first 10 minutes. Only ask what the child understands. After 10 minutes they solved the problem. After a week, grades had not soared, but dinner smelled less of spice. When statements of right and wrong recede, the sense of judgment recedes as well. A small shop owner frequently lost patience with suppliers over low quality or late deliveries. He helped her make a simple tracking board in her stockroom. Each item code has columns for order date, receiving date, variance, and quality note. At month end, she photographs the board and sends it to the supplier with a short note requesting adjustment. The supplier was surprised by the data and agreed to divide delivery windows. Loud phone arguments decreased. The stockroom board did not just do management work, it worked to cool the heat. In a dry season, the village well's water level dropped. Fighting over water could turn into accusation. He proposed a color ticket system by time slot and maximum permitted draw, giving priority to houses with small children or sick people. A marked bucket was hung at the well so whoever draws water sees the mark. Every evening the person in charge records how many tickets distributed and how many buckets drawn publicly. Disputes need not be totally avoided, but they no longer have hiding places when everything shows on the scale. Recipients of their share feel less injustice. A recreational soccer team wanted to use a portable loudspeaker to cheer. Neighbors worried about noise. He proposed they make a small hand flag strip and agree on vocal cheering in 2-time windows. Outside those times, only clapping or singing without speaker is allowed. Emotions have a reasonable outlet. Neighbors can still take afternoon naps. No need to extinguish enthusiasm, only to give it a just frame. The community center received sponsorship for a small library, with most of the books donated by locals. At first, people hesitated to borrow or lend books, fearing potential arguments. Together with a group of volunteer librarians, he set a few simple rules. 1 notebook to track loans and returns, 1 corner for book suggestions, and 1 box for those who wanted to leave late return fines anonymously. No one was ever called out by name, but a sense of self-respect began to awaken. A small sheet of paper showing borrowing statistics was pinned to a post. The circulation rate stayed steady, and complaints became rare. When self-respect has a place to shine, frustration finds its shadow. One day, a group of tourists lost their way and parked their cars, blocking the village entrance. Horns blared, voices rose in annoyance. He ran out, set up a temporary sign showing parking directions, drew 3 spots in chalk, and guided the drivers to turn around using the wider road. The villagers then hung a small sign at the alley entrance, gently reminding visitors of quiet hours. The issue was resolved quickly. Many neighborhood problems do not need the police, just a piece of chalk and someone willing to stand still through the first 5 minutes of anger. Mid-year, The district invited the village to contribute to a new public behavior code. He submitted a proposal with examples, emphasizing implementation and supporting tools. Rules cannot just be pretty sentences, they must come with signs, cards, schedules, measurements, and someone in the middle to make them work. For the first time, the official document included an appendix listing the minimum tools for each rule. Readers could finally see the connection between words and real life, feeling less alienated. Frustration toward official documents lessened because the documents now had something tangible to lean on. In late autumn, he organized a full-scale emergency drill. The scenario was a small fire at the market. One person ran to the quiet tent to relay the message. Another directed people with a loudspeaker. Someone grabbed the fire extinguisher. Another made phone calls. Within 10 minutes, everything was in order. Later, when a real fire broke out in a sticky rice stall's kitchen, everyone reacted calmly, just as they had practiced. The fire went out, the smoke cleared, and the rice bowls were wrapped as usual. Gentle discipline was born from such small drills, quiet, without flags or slogans, but it saved the voice of the whole market. During long winter nights, when families had more free time and old stories easily reignited tempers, he suggested each household hang a question calendar instead of a task calendar. Every evening, they were allowed to ask only 2 questions about real matters, never about an absent third person. A month later, sarcastic remarks declined. Anger loves to hide in questions aimed at those not present. When questions are redirected to the right place, anger weakens. A group of young intellectuals returned to the village to teach basic programming to children. The students made rapid progress, but some became too absorbed, sitting at computers for hours, which upset their parents. He proposed applying the village's soft discipline to the classroom, a sand timer on each desk. Every time they switched lessons, they flipped the timer. When the sand ran out, about 5 minutes, they had to stand, walk around the room, and chat quietly with friends for 10 sentences before sitting down again. Their bodies and eyes rested, and parents complained less. Worry turned into the simple task of measuring sand. A journalist came to the village to write a story. He guided her through places that did not seem special: the reflection room, the quiet tent, public boards, and noise meters. When the article was published, many communities called to learn more. As always, he said, "I have no secret. There are just a few quiet things that keep working on their own. If your place lacks someone to stand in the middle, train one. If there is no signboard, hang one. If there is no measuring tool, borrow one. If there is no calendar, write one. Once you have these 4, the rest will come naturally." On the last day of the year, he gathered with the rhythm-keeping group. Each person shared a small story about how they had calmed an argument that week. One told of ending a near fight with a single chalk line. Another changed a label into a description. Another extended silence for 10 minutes before deciding. They laughed and poured tea, without any lofty words. Outside, the wind rustled the bamboo leaves. The village felt like a book that had been read to a satisfying page, leaving space for the next. He looked at them and thought, the true meaning of being immune to anger is not building a thick wall around the heart, but placing many small handrails along life's path so that when someone stumbles, they have something to grab and stand upright again. People who have something to hold on to rarely push others down. Those who rarely push are rarely pushed. The whole village moves through the seasons together, not because the wind has stopped, but because they have learned to plant stakes, draw chalk lines in the right places, hang signs at eye level, call things by their names at the right time, stay silent for 10 minutes when needed, and then continue their work as if anger were just a small pebble that had slipped out of their pocket. The following spring, the first rains fell softly over the red-tiled roofs of the village like a gentle new beginning. Trees sprouted fresh buds, grass grew on the square in front of the communal hall, and the public boards around the market, faded by sun and wind, were freshly repainted. He sat under the temple eaves, opening his notebook thick with notes, every page filled with handwriting and chalk marks. Beside him sat the new rhythm keepers, young people who had grown up around the quiet tent. The time boards, and the feedback cards. Now, they were the ones who would carry these ways farther beyond the village. The first meeting of the year was not about old matters but about bringing their model to the Midland region. They knew that in those areas, some villages still did not have stable electricity or even boards to hang signs on, but they did have people rich in heart and perseverance. He told them, "We are not bringing a model, we are bringing principles. Each place will choose its own tools. As long as those tools help people see the way, see each other, and know when to stop before anger begins." A young woman in the group asked, "If they have no boards, no chalk, how can they guide others?" He smiled. "When there is no board, we can use string, bricks, or the right words at the right time. What matters is not the material, it is the rhythm." 3 weeks later, the group set out. They carried a few wooden boards, a noise meter, some rolls of nylon rope, and a stack of handwritten guides. The winding road up to the Midlands unfolded like layers of untold stories. The first village they reached sat along a hillside. Houses were sparse, children ran barefoot, and the adults looked at the strange visitors with a mix of curiosity and caution. He said nothing about theory. He simply asked to join a village meeting. The meeting began with a dispute over water. 2 streams were drying up. Those upstream took more, leaving little for those below. As each side spoke, their voices rose and fingers pointed. He listened quietly, then asked for a branch and drew lines in the dirt, one dividing the water source, one marking irrigation times. Then he asked, if these 2 lines were replaced with a board, could everyone record it together? They nodded. The next day, he and 2 young villagers built a bamboo frame, strung it with rope, and hung colored tags. 3 days later, tensions subsided. People still disagreed, but once there was something to point to, voices no longer needed to shout. They left that village and crossed 3 hills to another hamlet where a new school was being built. The sound of the cement mixer roared all day, keeping children awake and irritating the villagers. He used the noise meter, read out the numbers, and asked, "At what time is the noise the loudest?" Someone answered, "At noon." He said, "Then let us write on the board that noon is rest hour, machines stop, and work resumes later." They agreed. A week later, the board still stood. The noise had been cut in half, and the shouting had disappeared. The board, though small, had become a bridge between both sides. The following month, the group reached a lakeside community where people were arguing over docking spots. He did not put up a board right away. Instead, he walked around the lake and asked each person, "What do you need your dock for?" One carried fish, another carried passengers, and another only needed a place to anchor. He wrote down each answer in pencil. When he had them all, he drew a rough map in the sand, dividing the shoreline according to function. No one lost their place. Each dock simply found a new purpose. An old man looked at the drawing and said, "This is like redrawing people's hearts." He replied, "Yes, only now, the heart is not inside the chest but reflected on the water, where everyone can see it." By late summer, they returned to their village. The people gathered in the communal yard to hear the stories from their journey. Everyone grew quiet as he said, "We have learned that anger is not death, it is a signal. But if that signal is not guided through a tool, it becomes fire. When there is a tool, that fire turns into light." He opened his notebook and read a few lines from the newest pages. The first page read, "Any community can live in peace if people agree to look at the same board." The second, "No one is exempt from anger. There are only those who know how to name it at the right time." The third, "Discipline does not kill emotion. It teaches emotion to stand in line." The fourth, "The beauty of fairness is that it measures itself." He closed the notebook and looked toward the quiet tent. The wind blew through, and the white fabric swayed gently like breathing. Someone asked, "Will you travel again?" He smiled. "Perhaps I will, but not far. As long as there are people here who know how to put up a board, I will stay." Winter came, colder than usual. He fell mildly ill and rested in the temple. Villagers brought him food, medicine, and even new sheets of paper they had made themselves. One was a new irrigation schedule for the cooperative. Another listed the number of arguments in the market, written in a student's handwriting. Another was a map of crops planted along the main road. As he read each one, he felt as though he was watching seasons flow into each other, work continuing seamlessly from one to the next. On the last night of the year, the moon rose slowly, its silver light spreading across the rooftops. He sat up and wrote one final line in his notebook. Being immune to anger is not about sitting still in silence, but about teaching your heart to function amid noise. You do not need to retreat to the mountains. Just learn to raise a board among people. The next morning, he sat on the porch, watching the new rhythm keeping students at work. They were arguing over a crookedly hung board. He smiled and stayed silent. One of them looked around, fetched a ruler, and adjusted the board. The group fell quiet. In that moment, he knew there was nothing more he needed to say. The breeze passed by, chalk dust shimmered in the sunlight, and the sound of bamboo clinking softly echoed like the heartbeat of a village that had learned how to balance itself in peace. As the night slowly faded and the gentle light of dawn filtered through the leaves, we realized that peace has never been a gift falling from the sky. It is the result of stopping at the right moment, of speaking just enough, of hanging small boards at eye level, and of hearts that have learned not to let anger lead the way. Today's story is not only about one man or one village. It is a small mirror for all of us, to remind us that each day, we can choose to be calmer, lighter, and more understanding. If your heart feels even a little quieter after hearing this story, hold on to that moment as if it were a bright pebble resting in your palm. Because sometimes, a single peaceful moment can change the entire day ahead. Thank you for being part of Silent Soul Garden, a place where every story reminds us that peace has always been within reach. If you wish to continue this journey of stillness, wisdom, and healing, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone you think might also need a little calm in their heart. See you again in the nights to come, where together we will listen, understand, and learn how to walk gently through this world. May you have a deep sleep, a fresh morning, and a heart wide enough that no anger can reach it.